Welcome, my friend, to another quiet night of wandering through the long corridors of history. Tonight, I invite you to settle into your pillow, let your breath soften, and allow the world outside to disappear. Together, we will drift far away from the noise of the modern world and journey into a land shaped by wind, by silence, and by endless horizons. This is the beginning of the story of the Mongol Empire and of the ancient steppe that forged it, a place where nature speaks louder than kings, where survival is an art, and where the sky itself feels close enough to touch. So close your eyes if you wish, breathe slowly, and let the rhythm of this story lead you into the calm of the night. Let us begin where all Mongol stories begin, in the great ocean of grass. The Mongolian steppe stretches so wide and so far that, from a distance, it feels like the edge of the world. There are no walls here, no stone towers, no forests thick enough to stop the wind, only rolling fields of tall, whispering grass that bend like waves beneath the touch of the breeze. The sky above is impossibly vast, a deep blue that seems carved from eternity itself. During the day, it glows with the bright chill of northern sun, sharp and distant. At night, it becomes a dome of stars so numerous that one might imagine the heavens have opened. This land has no boundaries except those drawn by storms and seasons. Everything feels exposed here, yet everything also feels infinite. Wind is the first thing a traveler notices. It glides across the plains like a living spirit, brushing against the skin with a cold, ancient hand. It carries the scent of distant herds, of frozen rivers, of smoke from fires miles away. To the nomads, this wind is not merely air in motion. It is memory. It is prophecy. It is a companion as familiar as a brother, and as unpredictable as an enemy. The steppe wind has shaped families, shaped tribes, shaped destinies. Some say it even shaped the great Khans themselves. In winter, the land becomes a frozen kingdom of white and silver. The ground hardens like iron. The cold pierces through layers of felt and fur, stinging the face until the skin grows numb. A rider can freeze to death in the time it takes to saddle a horse. Snowstorms arrive without warning, drowning the world in a white curtain so thick that even herds vanish into it. Yet despite this cruelty, there is a strange beauty in the silence of winter nights. The moonlight lies gently upon the snow. The grass beneath slumbers, and in that quiet, the nomads whisper stories of their ancestors and their spirits. Summer is no softer. The sun scorches the plains until cracks form in the dry soil. Water becomes precious. Horses kick up dust clouds that hang in the air for hours, glittering in the heat. Sandstorms roll across the land like golden walls, swallowing visibility in an instant. But even then, life persists. The herds graze, the children laugh, the riders continue their endless journeys across the steppe. This is not a land that allows weakness. It teaches people to bend, but never to break. It demands courage, but rewards endurance. It offers little comfort, but endless freedom. And in this vast and unforgiving world, countless tribes once roamed long before a single empire ever existed. Among them were the Tatars, a people known for clever strategies and sharp tongues. Their alliances shifted like the weather, and their ambitions often stirred fear among their neighbors. They were skilled in ambush, skilled in diplomacy, and skilled in surviving the many political games of the steppe. Some stories remember them as treacherous, others portray them as survivors shaped by their time, but all agree that the Tatars were a force to reckon with. Further west rode the Merkits, a tribe whose identity was deeply tied to family honor. Their feuds lasted generations, branching like tangled roots through the years. To offend a Merkit was to earn a memory that never faded. Their riders were fierce, their pride unyielding, and their customs woven with old traditions. They lived by the sword and by the oath. and they defended both with unshakable resolve. Beyond them stretched the lands of the Naiman, a people renowned for their culture and learning. They had scribes who kept records, priests who read the stars, and leaders who governed through both power and ceremony. Their tents were filled with books and scrolls. Their warriors were disciplined. Their leaders wore garments embroidered with symbols of ancient authority. The Naiman were perhaps the most polished of all the steppe tribes. To the southwest lived the Karaite, followers of Nestorian Christianity. They built strong alliances, controlled important trade routes, and held influence that reached far beyond the grasslands. Their khans ruled with both wealth and reputation, and their people practiced customs that blended steppe traditions with foreign beliefs. Some of their princes corresponded with Chinese courts. Others sought support from kings in distant lands. Among all the tribes, the Karaite stood out as both respected and powerful. And finally, there were the Mongols. Not the empire we know today, not yet. In those early centuries, Mongol was a small word whispered without fear or admiration. They were scattered into countless clans, some poor, some wandering, some nearly forgotten. Their enemies dismissed them, their rivals overlooked them. Even the steppe itself seemed indifferent to their existence. Yet from these humble beginnings would rise a storm that the world would never forget. Life among these tribes followed rhythms as ancient as the earth. There were no palaces or marble halls, no written laws carved in stone. What kept order was honor, tradition, and the memory of the ancestors. A man's worth was measured by skill, loyalty, and courage. A woman's wisdom could guide a family, a camp, even an entire tribe. Children learned to ride before they learned to walk. Every household lived inside the felt walls of a ger, warm in winter, cool in summer, and easy to move when the seasons changed. The hearth at the center was sacred. The smoke hole above served as a window to the sky, a reminder that even while sheltered, one must never forget the world outside. Daily life was a blend of harsh labor and quiet beauty. Men cared for the horses, hunted, and defended the tribe. Women managed the camp, tended fires, milked animals, and kept both home and family steady. Their strength was the soul of the nomadic world. Stories passed from mother to daughter carried the wisdom of centuries. Children raced across the grasslands with the wind at their backs. They practiced with small bows. They helped tend the herds. They listened closely to the elders, memorizing tales of heroes and spirits. Their laughter, brief and bright, softened the harshness of life. There were no kings of 1,000 walls here, only khans whose authority depended entirely on their ability to inspire loyalty. A leader who failed would be abandoned. A leader who succeeded would be followed into storm and fire. It was a simple rule, but a powerful one that would one day shape the rise of a conqueror. Yet beneath all this daily motion lay a deeper truth. Life on the steppe was fragile. The harsh winters could claim entire herds. A sudden drought could bring hunger. A raid at night could change a family's fate forever. Every tribe lived with constant awareness that survival was something to be earned, not granted. And so, they developed their own unwritten laws. Never take from the weak. Never lie to your brothers in arms. Never break a sworn oath. Never forget a kindness. But also, never forget a betrayal. These rules were carried not in books, but in blood, in stories, and in the silent expressions shared between riders on cold mornings. When tribes met, diplomacy was delicate. A poorly chosen word could spark conflict. An old grudge could reignite a feud. And yet, these gatherings were also moments of peaceful exchange, trading goods, arranging marriages, renewing alliances. Around shared fires, warriors sang songs that echoed across the plains. Elders told tales of spirits who lived in the sky. Children fell asleep to the soft hum of strings and flutes. The steppe was still a place of danger, but also of hope, of endless possibility, of lives shaped not by walls or crowns, but by the cold whisper of the wind. And it was into this world, wild, scattered, and filled with ancient tension, that a single child would soon be born. A child who held a blood clot in his fist, a sign of destiny whispered by the heavens, a child whose name would one day shake continents. But before we reach his story, we must understand the land that created him. This land of grass and sky, this land of hardship and freedom, this land where the wind remembers everything. And so, as the flames of night dance gently in the distance, let your mind rest on the image of the boundless steppe. Let the softness of the wind guide your breath. Let the rhythm of hooves fade slowly into the horizon. For this is only the beginning, and the story of the Mongol Empire has just taken its first quiet breath. Tonight, we continue our quiet journey through the early chapters of a life that would one day shape the fate of empires. As you rest comfortably, breathe gently, and let your mind soften, we return to the lonely expanse of the steppe, to a night thick with wind, stars, and ancient expectation. The world is cold here, yet full of hidden warmth. The sky is dark, yet filled with quiet fire. And beneath that sky, in a small felt tent pressed against the wind, a child is about to take his first trembling breath, a child whose arrival would echo across centuries. A child born with a strange and powerful sign. Temujin came into the world clutching a clot of blood in his tiny hand. It lay there like a dark jewel, glistening under the lamplight, shocking the midwives into an awed silence. To the people of the steppe, this was no ordinary birth. A baby born gripping blood was believed to be touched by destiny, marked for greatness or destruction, blessed by the eternal blue sky, or cursed by it. Some whispered that such a child would conquer nations. Others murmured that he would bring storms wherever he walked. Yet in that quiet tent, warmed by the breath of horses outside and the murmur of women inside, only one truth mattered. A new life had entered the world, and already the winds seemed to change direction. Holun, his mother, held him close, studying his face as if she could already see what lay ahead. She whispered ancient prayers to Tengri, the sky god, asking for strength, for protection, for the courage to raise a son in a world that bent easily but shattered quickly. His father, Yasuge, a respected but not powerful chieftain, looked at the child with stern pride. He named him Temujin after a warrior he had once captured in battle. The name carried weight, as though the spirit of that fallen enemy would now live on within his son. But destiny, no matter how grand, is never simple, and the winds on the steppe do not blow without purpose. In those early days, Temujin's family seemed steady and whole. Their camp sat near the Onon River, where the grass grew green in spring and the water flowed clear and cold. Children played near the riverbanks. Women tended fires that crackled beneath iron pots. Men rode out each morning to hunt or guide the herds. It was a peaceful rhythm, familiar and ancient, one that Temujin would remember for the rest of his life, even when everything else faded. But peace on the steppe is often like ice, beautiful, thin, and quick to break. And the first crack appeared when Temujin was still a young boy. Yasuge had decided to seek a future marriage for his son, as was custom among the tribes. He traveled with Temujin toward the camp of a family known for their honor, hoping to secure an alliance that would lift their own clan's fortunes. Along the road, Yasuge encountered a group of Tatar warriors, old enemies, old wounds. But the Tatars greeted him with forced smiles and polite bows, hiding bitterness beneath their breath. They offered him food and drink, gestures of hospitality masking a darker intent. And Yasuge, perhaps tired, perhaps distracted by the demands of the journey, accepted their gifts. The poison worked slowly. A creeping ache in the stomach, a tightening in the chest, a dizziness that clouded the mind. He continued the journey, pushing through the pain, determined to bring his son home before he collapsed. But by the time they reached their camp again, Yasuge was barely conscious. His final days were filled with fever. He faded in silence, leaving behind a family too vulnerable, too isolated, and surrounded by rivals waiting for the scent of weakness. When the news of his death spread, the clans who had once followed him scattered like birds in a storm. Their loyalty had been to the father, not to the widow and her children. Holun, once respected as a chief's wife, was now only a burden. The families who had shared their fires with her turned their backs. They took the herds, the supplies, the shelter, everything of value, and walked away, abandoning her to the empty wind. She was left alone with her children on the cold, unforgiving steppe. Temujin, his brothers, his sisters, a small cluster of souls shivering against the cruelty of winter. Snow fell in heavy sheets, covering the tracks of those who had left them behind. The wind howled outside the tent like a warning. Inside, the fire burned low. Survival became a daily ritual of desperation. The children dug for roots beneath frozen soil. They caught rodents, rabbits, and the smallest of animals, anything that could be eaten. There were nights when their stomachs ached with hunger, days when the wind cut so deeply that their fingers burned with numbness. Holun comforted them with stories of their ancestors, tales of strength and endurance, of warriors who had risen from nothing. She reminded them that they were still of noble blood, even if the world no longer cared. And through all the hardship, Temujin listened. He watched. He learned. Hardship had a way of shaping the spirit, sharpening it like a blade honed against stone. And Temujin's spirit was being carved by hunger, loss, and cold. But not all of his challenges came from outside. Within his own family, tension brewed like a storm on the horizon. Beta, his older half-brother, was strong, proud, and increasingly domineering. As the eldest, he claimed the rights of leadership. He took more food than the others. He ignored Holland's authority and treated Temujin and his younger brother Kasar like shadows rather than siblings. For young Temujin, already burdened by fear and responsibility, this was unbearable. One day, as the hunger grew too sharp and the resentment too deep, Temujin and Kasar confronted Beta. Their bodies trembled not just from cold, but from the weight of a decision no child should ever have to make. An arrow was notched, a string pulled back, a breath held. Then the arrow flew, swift and final. Beta fell in the grass. The steppe held its breath, and in that moment, Temujin crossed a threshold that would shape the man he would become, one who made hard choices, one who placed survival above sentiment, one who understood that leadership sometimes required sacrifices that tore at the soul. Holun did not praise them, nor did she condemn them. She simply looked at her sons with eyes that carried both sorrow and recognition. She knew the steppe demanded harshness. She knew survival sometimes meant becoming a storm. Not long after, another challenge came like a shadow slipping across the plains. Temujin was taken captive by the Taichud, a clan with old grudges against his family. They bound him with a heavy wooden collar, a cruel frame that forced his head low and made escape nearly impossible. He was watched like a stray animal, mocked, ordered about, stripped of dignity. But even in bondage, Temujin's spirit did not waver. He waited. He watched. He observed every guard's movements, every weakness in their routine. And one night, when the moon hung low and the guards grew careless, Temujin slipped away into the tall grass. The wooden collar weighed him down. Every step was agony. But he did not stop. A sympathetic family hiding near the river found him, exhausted and shaking. They helped him break free from the collar. They fed him warm broth. They gave him shelter until he could once again walk on his own. It was a small kindness in a world that rarely offered kindness at all. Temujin never forgot it. He learned then that loyalty could be born from compassion as surely as from fear. Returning to his family after escaping captivity felt like stepping into a new life. He was no longer the frightened boy abandoned on the snow. He had tasted hunger and humiliation, but also resilience and mercy. His heart had been shaped by suffering, and he understood now that strength could not come from bloodline alone. It had to be earned. As he grew older, he began to gather people around him, people who, like him, had been forgotten or cast aside. Runaway slaves, children of broken families, young warriors with no tribe to call home, widows and orphans who had lost everything to raids. These were not the noble-born warriors that steppe chieftains usually sought. These were the overlooked, the unwanted, the invisible. But Temujin saw value where others saw weakness. He believed loyalty forged in suffering was stronger than loyalty inherited by birth. And slowly, quietly, he began to build something new. One of the most important bonds he formed during this time was with Jamuka. The two had known each other as children, sharing milk from the same bowl, laughing beneath the shade of the same trees. Jamuka came from a noble line, carrying himself with confidence, refinement, and the ease of someone who had never known true hunger. Yet he and Temujin felt a strange pull toward each other. They spoke the same language of dreams, ambition, and yearning for something greater than the small tribes that surrounded them. One night, under a sky filled with stars like scattered embers, they performed the ancient ritual of Anda-sworn brotherhood. They exchanged gifts, they pledged loyalty, they made promises that felt eternal. Jamuka spoke of honor and tradition. Temujin spoke of a future shaped not by ancestry but by merit. The fire crackled between them, warm and bright. The wind sang through the grass, and for a moment, the two boys imagined a world they might build together. They could not know then how their bond would be tested, how it would twist, how it would haunt the steppe. But for now, in this quiet memory, the two were brothers, and the steppe itself seemed to bless their union with a soft, whispering wind. As Temujin approached manhood, he carried with him all that the steppe had taught him, the sharpness of hunger, the coldness of abandonment, the darkness of captivity, the burden of killing a brother, the warmth of compassion from strangers, the power of chosen loyalty. Every moment carved something into him, like symbols etched into bone. Hardship had not broken him, it had forged him, and though he did not yet know it, the world was already beginning to shift around him. Small groups of wandering families began to settle near him, drawn by his quiet determination. Young men sought his guidance. Women respected his mother's wisdom. Whispers traveled across the plains that the son of Yasuge still lived, that the boy with destiny in his fist had survived winter after winter, that he had returned from bondage with fire in his eyes. People listened. People followed. Temujin was not yet a leader, not yet a Khan, but the steppe was watching. The tribes were murmuring, the wind was stirring, and soon, all the scattered threads of his early life, pain, loyalty, loss, courage, would weave together into a tapestry far larger than any he could imagine. For now, though, he remained a young man standing at the edge of possibility. His past lay behind him like a trail of footprints in the snow. His future stretched endlessly before him. And the eternal blue sky waited, silent and watchful, for the moment when destiny would call his name. Let your breath settle like falling snow as we step quietly into one of the most dramatic turning points on the Mongolian steppe. This chapter is a tale not only of war, but of brotherhood, ideals, and the slow unraveling of a bond once sealed beneath the stars. It is the story of Temujin and Jamukha, two men who began as soul brothers, but whose dreams pointed in opposite directions. So allow your mind to drift gently, like a lone horse wandering across twilight grass. And let us return once more to the whispering plains where fate took shape. For many years, Temujin and Jamukha carried the warmth of childhood brotherhood in their hearts. They had shared fires, shared milk, and shared secrets. They had spoken of the future with the confidence of young men who believed the world could be shaped as easily as soft clay in their hands. But time has a way of revealing deeper truths. Beneath their friendship lay two visions of leadership that could never coexist. Jamukha was born into aristocracy. His bloodline tied him to noble houses, respected for generations. He walked with the quiet assurance of someone who believed greatness flowed naturally through his veins. To him, the world made sense only when ordered by hierarchy, by titles, lineage, and the inherited privileges of high birth. Temujin was shaped by hardship, not blood. He believed leaders should rise through strength, loyalty, and the courage to endure suffering. He had seen how noble families abandoned his mother. He had seen how the powerless survived through skill, not ancestry. And he believed, deep within, that the steppe should reward merit, not tradition. These differences were subtle at first. They were small shifts in perspective, like two riders whose paths begin only inches apart but drift farther with every passing mile. But soon, those inches became chasms. Jamukha surrounded himself with nobles, sons of aristocrats, heirs of powerful families, men raised in the comfort of status. Their tents were large, decorated with rich fabrics and polished saddles. Their fires burned brightly with abundant fuel. Their voices carried the confidence of those who expected to rule. Temujin's camp looked very different. Beside him gathered the poor, the abandoned, the overlooked, former slaves, orphaned children, families broken by war, wanderers who had lost tribes, homes, or honor. To them, Temujin's voice felt like shelter after a long storm. He promised fairness. He promised loyalty. He promised a future where the weak were not swallowed by the strong. It did not take long for the entire steppe to sense the tension between the two rising leaders. The nobles whispered that Temujin was dangerous, a man who would tear apart sacred traditions. The common families murmured that Jamukha represented the past, a past where only a few ever tasted power. The divide sharpened one quiet morning when a single group of families, weary of the old orders, gathered their belongings and moved their tents beside Temujin's camp. They chose him not because of bloodline, but because of trust, and the nobles saw this as a grave insult. Jamukha could not ignore it. The steppe could not hold two leaders who both sought loyalty from the same scattered people. The first fracture had appeared, and like cracks in ice, it spread quickly. Word traveled like wind. The clans aligned themselves. The aristocrats rallied behind Jamukha, the noble Khan. The poor, the desperate, the hopeful gathered around Temujin, the people's Khan. Old men shook their heads, sensing that war was coming. Children whispered stories of the two brothers who would someday fight beneath the eternal blue sky. And then, one night, under a sky heavy with the scent of approaching rain, Jamukha made the first move. He rode to Temujin's camp with a force of warriors, their horses cloaked in darkness. They descended suddenly, as swift as a hawk diving toward prey. They seized animals, burned tents, and scattered families into the night. The attack was not only a blow to Temujin's pride, it was the first declaration of open conflict. When dawn broke, smoke lingered over the plain like a mourning shroud. Temujin stood in the ashes, quiet, steady, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and resolve. He knew then that the bond of Anda, the bond of sworn brotherhood, had been shattered. The steppe had chosen war. Temujin began gathering his followers. They came with bruised limbs, tear-streaked faces, and hearts filled with fear. But Temujin did not speak of vengeance. He spoke of justice. He spoke of unity. He spoke of a future greater than tribal feuds. And slowly, the trembling hearts steadied. A new force began to form. Still, Jamuka struck again, reminding the steppe of his power. His forces captured Temujin's followers, 70 young men, full of hope and strength. To make a statement that would echo through the plains, Jamuka had them executed in a horrifying manner, boiled alive in great iron cauldrons. The screams drifted across the grasslands like a terrible wind. The steppe remembered. Temujin remembered. But this story is not one of rage. It is a story of transformation. And so, Temujin did not rush into battle driven by fury. He prepared, he learned, he hardened. The inevitable clash between the two former brothers came at Dalan Balzut, a battle remembered not for its glory, but for its sorrow. Close your eyes now, and let the soundscape settle around you, as though you were standing on that distant field. Hear the wind whistling through the tall grass. Hear the faint clatter of hooves. Hear the quiet tension in the air before the first arrow flies. Temujin's forces were fewer, but determined. Jamuka's forces were larger, guided by noble confidence. The two armies faced each other beneath clouds drifting like slow ships across the sky. The air was cold, with the taste of iron. Then, a bowstring snapped. An arrow cut the air with a sharp, whispering hiss. And the battle began. The clash was fierce, though muffled in the way distant thunder feels gentle to the ear. Hooves pounded in rhythmic waves. Arrows rained down in soft, deadly arcs. The grass bent beneath bodies, both living and fallen. Dust rose in swirling patterns, blurring the line between friend and foe. Jamuka's nobles fought with the pride of generations behind them. Temujin's warriors fought with the desperation of men who had survived hunger, loss, and abandonment. For hours, the battle ebbed and flowed like a tide. But at last, sheer numbers tipped the balance. Temujin's line broke. His men retreated beneath the cover of the gathering dusk. The field fell silent except for the moans of the wounded and the distant cries of circling ravens. Temujin had lost. He had lost the field, lost friends, lost brothers in arms. But in the quiet that followed the chaos, something strange happened. He felt no despair. Only clarity. Only understanding. Through defeat, he had glimpsed the truth. The old ways of tribal warfare could no longer shape the future. Loyalty built on bloodline alone was brittle. Strength built without discipline was fragile. If he wanted to build something lasting, something larger than a single clan, he needed a different kind of order. And so, Temujin withdrew into the vastness of the plains. He tended to the wounded. He comforted the families whose sons had died. He rebuilt the shattered spirits of his people. He traveled from camp to camp, not with threats but with a message of unity, a message of justice, a message that the steppe could become something more than a battlefield of feuding tribes. In his mind, he began shaping new ideas about leadership. He imagined an army where rank came from merit, not ancestry, where a slave could rise to command thousands, where a woman's wisdom could guide decisions, where the poor were protected rather than exploited, where laws were clear, fair, and applied to everyone, even Khans. These ideas were bold, revolutionary, and deeply unsettling to those who clung to the old world. Temujin also rethought how warriors should be organized. Instead of fighting by clan, he envisioned units woven from many families, loyal not to their blood ties, but to their commander and to him. This would break tribal loyalties, ending the constant cycle of betrayal. It would create something new, a unified force bound by discipline rather than lineage. He trained his men relentlessly, He taught them to ride with unmatched skill, to fire arrows at full gallop, to feign retreat and strike from unexpected angles. He encouraged them to treat captured enemies with fairness so that surrender would be preferable to resistance. He emphasized a strict code of conduct where theft, cowardice, and betrayal were punished swiftly. Gradually, this new order took shape like a skeleton beneath the flesh of his growing following. At the same time, more families began to join him. People who had suffered under aristocratic arrogance, people who longed for fairness, people tired of being trampled by noble conflicts. They saw in Temujin not just a warrior, but a protector, a leader who understood hardship and valued loyalty. Women admired his respect for their role. Children clung to his presence with trust. Men pledged themselves to him with solemn promises spoken under the open sky. Meanwhile, Jamuka ruled from the old traditions. He was still respected among the nobles. He still carried himself with the dignity of aristocracy. But the common people whispered, the wind carried rumors, that Jamuka's camp was tense, that noble arrogance created cracks within his ranks, that perhaps he did not understand the growing desire for a different kind of leader. Temujin's influence spread like a warm fire in the cold night, quiet at first, then bright, then impossible to ignore. He began forging alliances with powerful clans who admired his discipline. He negotiated marriages between families to weave loyalty tighter. He reached out to old enemies and offered them new beginnings. His reputation grew not through fear, but through respect. Yet he did not forget those boiled alive by Jamuka. He carried their memory like stones in his chest, not to fuel hatred, but to shape justice, to shape resolve, to remind himself that the steppe deserved better than cycles of cruelty. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Where once he had been a defeated young leader with a handful of loyal families, now he stood at the head of a rising movement, an idea more powerful than any single battle. Temujin's new understanding of law, order, and loyalty would soon reshape the entire world of the steppe. It would lead to battles greater than Dalan Balzut. It would lead to the fall of old powers. It would lead, ultimately, to the coronation of a man the world would one day call Genghis Khan. But for now, he stood quietly beneath the eternal blue sky, gathering strength like a storm building on the horizon. The wind carried whispers of his name. Families packed their tents and rode to join him. Hope began to spread through the grasslands, and Temujin, once an abandoned boy with empty hands, now held the future of the steppe in his grasp. For though he had been defeated, he had not been broken. The steppe had tested him, pain had shaped him, loss had strengthened him, and from the ashes of Dalan Balzut, a new leader was rising. A leader who would not be ruled by blood, but by vision. A leader who understood that true power came not from noble birth, but from the hearts of the people who followed him. The steppe was changing, the wind was shifting, and for the first time, destiny stirred. The wind over the steppe carried a new kind of tension, a quiet hum that slithered between the grass blades and settled into the ears of every warrior, every shepherd, every wandering soul. Whispers traveled farther than hooves, spreading word that Temujin's followers were growing in number and resolve. Families who once lived in fear now moved their tents closer to him, seeking not just protection, but a sense of purpose. Something was shifting on the plains, something older than memory, yet new as the first spark of dawn. Temujin had risen from defeat with clarity, conviction, and a vision sharper than the finest Mongol blade. He understood that revenge alone would never change the future of the tribes. Only unity, true unity, could end the endless storms of conflict that had defined the steppe for centuries. And so, he rode across the plains, gathering not just warriors, but hearts and hopes. Some came because they admired his discipline. Some came because they had seen his fairness. Some came because they longed for stability in a world that had always been uncertain. Others simply felt drawn to him, as though destiny itself tugged at their reins. Among the first to ride back into Temujin's banner was the Taichiud warrior, who had once helped him escape captivity in his youth. Temujin remembered the kindness, and he welcomed the man not as a subordinate, but as a brother. Acts like this spread quickly through the tribes, carrying a message stronger than any war cry. Temujin rewarded loyalty. Temujin remembered kindness. Temujin recognized worth in every man, regardless of birth. But mercy alone could not reshape the steppe. Temujin also understood that order was needed, order as firm as winter ice, yet as fair as morning rain. He began establishing rules that reached deeper than the customs of any one tribe. Rules that would bind his followers together with purpose stronger than blood. Rules that would soon become the backbone of a new world. One of his first reforms was to break the power of clan-based loyalties. For generations, Mongol warriors had fought under their own family banners, obeying their uncles, cousins, and lineage before any central authority. This created constant fractures, shifting allegiances, and fragile alliances. Temujin understood that an army divided by bloodlines would never stand against the greater storms yet to come. So he reorganized everything. Warriors from different clans were grouped into the same arban units of 10. 10 arbans formed a jaghun, a company of 100. 10 jaguns formed a mingan 1,000. And 10,000 formed a tumen, a force powerful enough to shake the earth with the thunder of its hooves. No man was placed with his brothers or his cousins. No commander led only his own kin. This new structure was radical, almost unthinkable, but it planted the seeds of unity. For the first time, the Mongol warriors began to see themselves not as fractured clans, but as a single people. As Temujin built his forces, word reached him of the Tatars, those who had poisoned his father years ago. The memory of Yesugei's final days remained etched in Temujin's heart like frost in winter stone. But even more importantly, the Tatars had long been puppets of foreign dynasties, serving as tools against other steppe tribes. Their presence was a lingering thorn in the fragile skin of the plains. Temujin gathered his trusted generals for counsel. The fire crackled softly between them, smoke drifting upward in lazy spirals that vanished into the night sky. Across the flames, each man read the silent determination in Temujin's eyes. They knew the time for settling old accounts had come. Dawn broke with a pale golden glow as Temujin's forces rode toward the Tatar encampments. The grass bent beneath the weight of thousands of hooves. The air trembled with the steady rhythm of disciplined riders, not the chaotic charge of loosely assembled clans. When they reached the Tatar lands, the battle unfolded quickly, almost effortlessly. Temujin's strategies were precise, his warriors unwavering, and the Tatars, though fierce, were scattered, unprepared for an onslaught of such magnitude. When the final blow was struck, Temujin stood among the silence of the aftermath. The Tatars, the tribe responsible for the death of his father, were no more. Their leaders fell. Their name faded into dust. But Temujin did not let the moment be consumed by vengeance. He welcomed many of the surviving families into his growing nation, giving them roles and responsibilities. To him, unity mattered more than blood feuds. What he destroyed were the chains of the past, not the people themselves. Word of the Tatar defeat spread like lightning. The once powerful Merkit, still burning with old grudges, began to tremble at the thought of Temujin's rising influence. They remembered the night Holun had been taken from them, and the shame that had followed. But more than that, they remembered the young boy they once hunted. That boy was now a man, and that man was gathering storms. When Temujin's forces arrived at the Merkit strongholds, they struck with the ferocity of a winter gale. The Merkits fought bravely, yet they could not withstand the discipline and relentless coordination of the new Mongol army. As their defenses crumbled, women and children were taken under Temujin's protection. Former enemies became subjects. The Merkit menace once so frightening was dissolved, and Temujin's justice, though stern, was tempered with mercy. But even as these victories fortified his name, another danger grew on the horizon. Togrul, leader of the Karaite, and once a father-like figure to Temujin, began to feel uneasy about the young warrior's rising power. Togrul had helped Temujin in earlier years, and the two had shared deep mutual respect. But steppe politics were fragile. Pride was a brittle thing. Alliances could crumble beneath the weight of fear. Jamukha, ever skilled at whispering into noble ears, took advantage of this shifting tide. He approached Togrul with words dipped in honey and venom. He spoke of Temujin's ambitions, of his growing strength, of the danger he posed to those who stood in his way. Togrul listened. Doubt rooted itself in his heart like a weed, spreading into good soil. And soon, Togrul turned against the young leader he once called son. When Temujin learned of this betrayal, he felt the familiar sting of loss deeper than wounds inflicted by blades. Togrul's defection was not just a political blow, it was personal, but Temujin did not allow grief to cloud his judgment. He prepared his forces. He steadied his heart. The Karaite, powerful and wealthy, would not fall easily. The battle came upon a misty dawn, when the plains were wrapped in a thin veil of fog that moved like wandering spirits. The clashing of armies echoed through the grey morning, metal ringing against metal, hooves pounding like distant thunder. Temujin's strategies turned the tide once again. The noble-born warriors of the Karaite, though skilled, could not match the fierce discipline of his unified Tumans. By nightfall, the Karaite was shattered. Togrul fled, only to be killed by a rival tribe who did not recognize him. His flight, once proud, ended in tragic anonymity. The fall of Togrul sent shockwaves across the steppe. If a Khan as powerful as the Karaite ruler could be defeated, then none of the old powers was safe. The Nayman watched from the west, uneasy, proud, aware that their turn was coming. The air around their mountains filled with murmurs of looming conflict. The Nayman were not just warriors, they were scholars, mystics, and heirs to a long history of influence. Their encampments bustled with scribes, advisors, and astrologers who read the movement of stars to guide their decisions. But even knowledge could not shield them from the shifting balance of power. When Temujin's forces advanced toward Nayman lands, the clash was monumental. The Nayman fought with bravery and wisdom, but they were accustomed to the old ways Temujin had already outgrown. The battle that followed was one of the final storms before the great unification. The plains roared with the sound of thousands of hooves. Arrows darkened the sky, falling like a silent rain. Drums beat deep rhythms that pulsed through the earth itself. But Temujin's army, bound together not by clan but by purpose, advanced with precision. Their discipline was unbreakable, their resolve unwavering, and the Nayman, though fierce, were swept away like fallen branches in the flood. With the Nayman defeated, the last great barrier to Temujin's dream crumbled. The scattered tribes of the Mongolian steppe, once divided by endless rivalries and ancient grudges, now bent toward a single center, a single rising star. Temujin's authority began to echo across the plains in ways no one had imagined. Yet he did not declare victory. He did not rush into celebration. He walked among his warriors, speaking to them with humility, reminding them that unity must be tended like fire. He strengthened alliances. He honored those who had fought beside him. He offered protection to families from fallen tribes. He gave positions of responsibility to men of all backgrounds, powerful or poor, noble or outcast. His word became law, gentle yet unyielding. The laws he laid down protected the weak, punished betrayal, restrained cruelty, and emphasized loyalty, merit, and justice. The steppe began to breathe easier. Children slept without fear of raids. Women traveled more safely. Trade flowed between tribes. For the first time in memory, the plains felt steady. Temujin's reforms extended to every corner of life. He created messenger networks that allowed information to flow swiftly across vast distances. He established internal ranks based on skill rather than birth. He promoted those who proved themselves in battle or in wisdom. He punished thievery and rewarded generosity. He ensured that surrendered enemies were protected, not slaughtered. Each decision, each rule, each gesture shaped the tribes into something they had never been, a nation. And though the full transformation had not yet come, the horizon was bright with possibility. The clans that had once stood separate now stood together beneath the open sky. The ancient chaos of the steppe began to calm, like a storm settling into gentle rain. The eternal blue sky seemed to watch with approval. Temujin, once an abandoned boy struggling to survive the cruelty of winter, now held the fate of an entire people in his steady hands. The scattered sparks of the tribes had been gathered into a single flame, one that would soon burn across continents. But that moment, the moment when the steppe would recognize him as its chosen ruler, still lay just ahead. For now, the wind whispered his name. Families spoke it with gratitude. Warriors spoke it with pride. Enemies spoke it with fear. And the steppe, vast and ancient, waited for what would come next. Temujin had crushed the Tatars. He had broken the Merkit. He had dismantled the Kerit. He had toppled the Naiman. He had laid laws across the plains. He had forged unity from division. And soon, at a great gathering beneath heaven's endless blue, he would be given a name the world would never forget. But that is the story of another chapter. A chapter where a leader becomes a legend. For now, rest in the quiet knowledge that history's greatest transformation was already underway, shaped by wind, by war, by wisdom, and by the unshakable spirit of a single man. The steppe awoke gently beneath the first light of spring, as if the land itself sensed that a turning point in history was drawing near. Frost still clung to the northern curves of the hills, but the air carried the warmth of renewal, a soft whisper that slipped through the grass and stirred the herds from their slumber. All across the plains, warriors, families, elders, and chieftains prepared their horses and packed their jurs, answering a call older than memory, a call to gather, a call to witness the shaping of a new order beneath the endless, sacred sky. The year was 1206. A date that would echo across centuries like a drumbeat felt more than heard. The tribes that had once stood apart, Tatar, Kerit, Merkit, Naiman, and countless others, were now bound by delicate threads of unity forged through fire, suffering, and vision. Their old rivalries lay buried beneath victories, treaties, and the undeniable power of a single man whose name carried both weight and promise. Temujin, son of Yesuge, had risen from abandonment and disgrace to become the center of a vast and growing constellation. Now, the people rode toward a great assembly unlike any the steppe had seen before. Families traveled for days, moving in long, winding lines across the plains. Horses snorted clouds of warm breath into the cool morning air. Oxen pulled heavy carts piled with tents, provisions, and gifts. Children peeked over the edges of carts, their eyes filled with curiosity and excitement. Women wrapped scarves around their heads to shield themselves from the brisk wind, guiding livestock and tending to the elderly. Men rode with straight backs, their bows and quivers strapped to their sides, their expressions solemn, as if aware that they were approaching the dawn of a new world. The location of the great gathering was chosen with care, a wide, gently sloping valley cradled between distant hills, open to the sky yet sheltered from harsh winds. It was a place where thousands could assemble without feeling confined. a place where the blue vault of the heavens arched overhead like a silent witness. The eternal blue sky had always been more than a backdrop to Mongol life. It was a deity, a guardian, and a judge. To gather beneath it was to place one's future in its hands. As people arrived, the valley transformed. Tents sprang up like white blossoms across the grass. Fires crackled everywhere, sending thin trails of smoke upward like offerings. Herds grazed peacefully along the outskirts, their bells chiming softly. Drums beat faint rhythms in the distance as groups approached from far regions. It was as if the entire steppe, every tribe, every clan, every wandering soul had become a single living entity, pulsing with anticipation. Temujin arrived not as a conqueror basking in triumph, but as a leader among his people. He rode a chestnut horse with a simple saddle, his clothing unadorned except for the subtle markings of his lineage. His expression was calm, focused, touched by a quiet humility that had won him the devotion of so many. When he dismounted, the crowd parted like grass bending to the wind. Mothers guided their children to the front so they could glimpse the man who had changed their lives. Warriors bowed their heads with genuine respect, not forced allegiance. Elders gazed at him with a mixture of pride and awe, sensing that the steppe had not seen such a figure in many generations. The gathering lasted several days, each dawn filled with discussion, ritual, and celebration. The khans of allied tribes approached Temujin with gifts, fine horses, silver ornaments, carved wooden bowls, and rare falcons trained for hunting. Shamans performed rites to cleanse the earth, their chants weaving through the air like soft threads of incense. Singers recited tales of old heroes while the younger warriors listened with shining eyes, imagining themselves in those ancient stories. But beneath the festivities lay a deep, almost sacred seriousness. This was not just a meeting. It was a transformation. The steppe had been fractured for so long that unity felt almost like a dream, fragile and shimmering. Now, for the first time, the dream was becoming solid, taking shape beneath the sky that watched over them all. On the morning of the ceremony, the valley fell into a respectful hush. The sun rose slowly behind a line of distant mountains, bathing the land in soft gold. Shamans lit sacred fires, their flames flickering like small suns on the grassy floor. Warriors formed a vast circle around the center of the valley, their armor polished, their horses calmly pawing at the earth. Elders moved into position, taking their places as witnesses of legitimacy and tradition. At the heart of the circle stood Temujin. He did not speak at first. He simply breathed in the cool morning air, allowing the moment to settle over him like a warm cloak. Behind him stood his most trusted companions, Burchu, Jelme, Subutai, Jebe, men who had followed him through storms of hardship and fire. Beside him stood his family, and around him stood a nation in the making. An elder stepped forward, his voice deep and steady. He spoke of the old days when the tribes were scattered and weak. He spoke of the wars that had drained the steppe of peace. He spoke of the men who had risen and fallen, unable to hold the clans together. And then he spoke of Temujin, how he had endured abandonment, survived captivity, humbled the proud, and bound the tribes through justice rather than terror. His words flowed through the crowd like a gentle river. People bowed their heads. Some wiped their eyes. Even hardened warriors felt a swell of emotions stirring in their chests. The elder lifted his palms toward the sky, calling upon Tengri, the eternal blue sky, to witness what was to come. Then came the moment that would reshape the world. Temujin stepped forward, the wind brushing lightly against his sleeves. The elders, the shamans, and the khans of the tribes approached him in a solemn line. They placed gifts at his feet: a bow carved with ancient symbols, a spear of polished steel, a saddle dyed deep red. Each gift represented a different facet of leadership: strength, wisdom, courage, mercy. When the last Khan had stepped back, a shaman raised a bowl of fermented mare's milk toward the sun. He sprinkled a few drops onto the earth, offering it to the spirits of ancestors who had walked these plains for centuries. A hush fell so deep that even the wind seemed to pause. And then, with a voice that carried across the valley, the shaman declared Temujin the universal ruler of all Mongols. He called him Genghis Khan, a title that meant the oceanic king, or the vast, all-encompassing ruler, a name that flowed across the grasslands like thunder, powerful and cleansing. The crowd bowed almost as one, the movement rippling through the valley like a great wave. Genghis Khan, the chosen of the sky, the one destined to bring order from chaos. Temujin closed his eyes. He felt the weight of the title settle upon him not as a burden, but as a solemn duty. He thought of his father, whose death had set this path in motion. He thought of his mother, who had endured the harshest winters to keep her children alive. He thought of his brothers, some lost to conflict, some still by his side. He thought of Jamuka, once a friend, now a memory shaped by both love and pain. Every struggle, every loss, every victory had led to this moment beneath the watchful sky. When he opened his eyes, he spoke. His voice was quiet yet strong, carrying the calm certainty of a man who had already walked through storms. He promised justice, he promised unity, he promised to protect the weak and reward the loyal. He promised to lead not with cruelty, but with wisdom, strength, and fairness. His words were measured, deliberate, like a steady hand guiding a restless horse. The crowd listened in silence, not because they were commanded to, but because his voice carried the weight of truth. This was no ordinary ruler. This was a man shaped by the same earth, wind, and hardship that had shaped them all. A man whose rise mirrored their own struggles. A man whose victory they felt as their own. After the speech, the festivities began. Musicians played horsehead fiddles, their mournful tones drifting across the valley like echoes of ancient songs. Children danced with ribbons. Women prepared great feasts, mutton roasted slowly until it fell apart in tender pieces, steaming bowls of broth, heaps of white cheese, fermented mare's milk poured into wooden cups. Warriors demonstrated their skill on horseback, racing, shooting arrows backward at full gallop, performing feats that delighted the crowds. But amid the celebrations, a new order quietly took form. Genghis Khan began assigning roles to his most trusted men, strengthening the foundation of the emerging empire. To Subutai, he gave command of scout forces. To Jebe, he entrusted missions requiring unmatched precision. To Burchu and Jelme, he gave responsibilities close to his person. He divided the Tumans with careful balance, ensuring loyalty, fairness, and stability. He unified tribes under shared laws that would become known as the Yasa. These laws were simple, but profound. Theft would not be tolerated. Cowardice would be punished. Betrayal would be met with swift justice. Religious freedom would be protected. Women would have rights previously unheard of on the steppe. Trade routes would be respected and guarded. Every man, no matter his birth, could rise through merit alone. The Yasa was not written on paper. It was carved into memory, carried in the hearts of every Mongol who pledged loyalty to Genghis Khan. It became a living form of order, a new rhythm guiding the vast dance of tribes becoming one nation. In the days following the coronation, ambassadors from distant lands arrived to observe the new Khan. They brought silks, spices, scrolls, and gifts from kingdoms near and far. Some came out of curiosity, some came out of fear, some came because they sensed that the Mongol people, once scattered like wild horses, now stood under a single banner that could no longer be ignored. Genghis Khan met each delegate with calm dignity. He accepted gifts, listened to their messages, and spoke words that traveled back to foreign courts with surprising swiftness. He would not be a small ruler of a small land, he would shape the world. In quiet moments between meetings, he walked among his people. He visited the tents of shepherds. He spoke with children who clung shyly to their mothers. He greeted warriors who had fought at his side through countless battles. He offered blessings to elders who had lived long enough to witness the rare gift of unity. To each person, he gave the same steady presence, warm, unwavering, deeply human. It was this, more than his victories, that bound the steppe to him. As the great gathering slowly came to an end, families dismantled their tents and prepared to return to their homelands. The valley, once filled with thousands, began to empty, yet the air remained charged with the memory of what had taken place. The steppe was no longer a land of fractured tribes. It was a nation, a people guided by a single voice, a single law, a single destiny. Genghis Khan watched the departing groups with quiet contemplation. The wind tugged gently at his sleeves, as if reminding him that unity was only the first step. Ahead lay challenges far beyond the borders of the steppe, empires of stone, cities of wealth, armies forged in unfamiliar lands. He knew he would face them all, not for glory, but for the future of his people. The eternal blue sky stretched above him, vast and serene. It seemed to acknowledge him with its silent, unwavering presence. He bowed his head slightly, honoring the heavens that had guided him from childhood to this moment of crowning. The world had awakened to a new ruler, a ruler not only of tribes, but of horizons, a ruler who would carve his name into the very bones of history. And as he mounted his horse, preparing for the long road ahead, one truth burned clear in his heart. The great journey had only just begun. The winds that swept across the Mongolian steppe carried whispers of a distant empire, an empire of stone walls, silk garments, bustling markets, and golden palaces. To the nomads, these stories sounded almost unreal, as if describing another world entirely, a place where the land did not curve into endless horizons but was instead broken by towering structures that touched the clouds. This empire was the Jin dynasty, the dominant power of northern China, and though it seemed impossibly rich and strong, it would soon find itself standing in the shadow of a rising force from the grasslands. Genghis Khan understood that the steppe could not remain isolated forever. To the south, the Jin dynasty controlled fertile plains, vast trade routes, and immense resources. They ruled over millions of people, maintained enormous armies, and guarded their borders behind mighty fortresses. But they also looked down upon the nomads, dismissing them as uncultured, primitive, and unworthy of respect. This arrogance would cost them dearly. The conflict began not with an army, but with an insult. The Mongols, seeking peace at a critical turning point, had sent envoys to negotiate with the Jin. These envoys carried gifts and words of respect, acting under the sacred protection of diplomacy, a protection honored across countless cultures and centuries. But the Jin court saw the Mongols as beneath them, like insects approaching a dragon's throne. They not only rejected the proposal, but killed the envoys, a gesture so offensive, so profoundly dishonorable, that it resounded across the entire steppe like a crack of thunder. For Genghis Khan, this was not merely an affront, it was a declaration. To kill a messenger was to kill trust, to spit upon the sacred customs of nations, and to challenge the heavens themselves. The Mongol leader, calm and measured as always, did not respond with wild fury. He responded with certainty. He knew that the only language the Jin understood was power, and so, as the wind shifted and the seasons turned, the steppe prepared for a war that would alter the fate of Asia. The initial Mongol raids struck quickly, testing the responses of the Jin armies. The Mongol riders were swift, precise, and relentless, weaving across the plains like arrows made of wind. The Jin forces, heavy with infantry and weighed down by rigid structures of command, could not match their speed. Yet the Jin had something the Mongols lacked: Fortified cities, massive, towering, impenetrable fortresses carved of stone and guarded by soldiers skilled in siege defense. If the Mongols wished to break the Jin, they would need to overcome these walls. And so began a long chapter of learning, adaptation, and transformation. For 3 years, the Mongols battled across the northern frontiers of the Jin dynasty. They rode across plains, rivers, and mountains, testing enemy formations, studying defenses, and capturing smaller fortresses to refine their techniques. During this time, they absorbed knowledge from conquered peoples, engineers from Central Asia, artisans from northern Chinese tribes, and skilled laborers who understood the secrets of siege warfare. The Mongols learned how to construct siege towers, battering rams, and catapults capable of hurling stones the size of oxen. They learned how to tunnel beneath walls, how to cut off supply lines, and how to use fire as a weapon against wooden gates. These methods were new to them, but they mastered them with the same intensity they applied to horseback archery. The steppe warriors who had once relied solely on the open plains now became students of stone and steel. They learned to adapt, to innovate, and to combine the speed of nomadic warfare with the precision of siege engineering. This fusion of tactics would become one of the defining strengths of the Mongol Empire. As the Mongol armies refined their strategies, the Jin court remained complacent, convinced that no barbarian horde could breach their fortified cities. Officials whispered proudly in their gilded halls, surrounded by silk screens and jade carvings, believing themselves protected by both their walls and the sheer size of their domain. But while the Jin gazed inward, wrapped in illusions of security, the Mongols grew stronger with each passing season. The greatest test of the conflict came when Genghis Khan turned his attention to Zhongdu, the grand capital of the Jin dynasty known today as Beijing. Zhongdu was a shining jewel of northern China. Its walls rose high into the sky, built of thick stone and reinforced with towers, gates, and watch posts. The city stretched wide, filled with markets, palaces, temples, and homes. It was a symbol of wealth and power, the beating heart of Jin civilization. To conquer it would be to break the Jin's spine. The Mongol armies encircled the city, forming a vast ring of horses, tents, and siege works. The sound of hammers echoed far across the plains, as engineers constructed engines of war catapults with strong wooden arms, towers that could reach the city's heights, and mechanisms capable of launching flaming projectiles. Genghis Khan watched the preparations with quiet determination. He understood the magnitude of the task. Zhongdu was not a mere fortress. It was a world unto itself, defended by thousands of soldiers and supplied by enormous granaries. The siege began with cautious strikes. Arrows rained down on the walls. Catapults hurled stones that broke crenellations and shattered towers. Mongol archers on horseback rode close enough to fire into open windows before dashing away. Inside the city, fear began to spread like smoke rising from a spark. Merchants closed their shops. Families hid within wooden homes. Officials argued in panic behind palace doors. But Zhongdu did not fall easily. Its defenders fought fiercely, firing crossbows from the walls, dropping stones and boiling water, reinforcing weak points and rallying behind their banners. Day after day, the Mongols pushed forward, only to be repelled. Night after night, the defenders trembled, listening to the distant thud of Mongol hammers building new engines in the darkness. The siege became a test of endurance. Food in the city dwindled. Prices soared until a single grain of rice became more precious than silver. Families rationed crumbs. Some boiled leather belts to make them edible. Others searched desperately for plants growing in hidden corners. The once glorious capital became a place of hunger and whispers. Outside the city, the Mongols remained relentless. They diverted nearby rivers to flood certain parts of the wall. They launched flaming projectiles that ignited wooden roofs. They attacked at unpredictable hours, overwhelming defenders who never knew when the next wave would strike. The Mongol siege army, once untrained in such warfare, had become a formidable machine. Then, in one of the final assaults, the Mongols breached the walls. Smoke rose from several quarters as the defenders struggled to regain control. The thunder of hooves echoed through the outer districts as Mongol cavalry poured into the city. Panic swept through the streets like a cold wind. People fled, clutching their children, abandoning possessions, praying to the heavens for deliverance. But no prayer could stop the tide now. Zhongdu fell. The great capital that had stood proudly for generations collapsed into chaos, swallowed by fire, fear, and the sheer force of Mongol discipline. Its defenses, so proud and so high, had proven powerless. Walls alone could not protect a kingdom whose leadership underestimated its enemy. The Mongols did not linger long in the ruins of Zhongdu. They secured the city, took what resources they needed, and ensured that it would no longer pose a threat. The fall of such a mighty city sent shockwaves across the region. It showed that no fortress, no matter how thick its walls, could withstand a combination of Mongol mobility, engineering, and relentless will. But despite this tremendous victory, Genghis Khan did something unexpected. He withdrew many of his forces from the deeper regions of northern China. To outsiders, this seemed puzzling. Why conquer such a magnificent city only to pull back? Why not push further south to claim the fertile lands, the wealthy markets, and the vast populations that lay beyond the Great Wall? The answer lay not in weakness, but in strategy. Genghis Khan understood that while the Mongols could win battles with unmatched efficiency, they did not yet have the manpower to garrison all the conquered territories. Holding a city like Zhongdu required tens of thousands of soldiers who would be tied down, unable to ride freely across the steppe. The Mongols were not yet ready to split their forces so thinly. To advance too far would be to risk overextension, a danger that even the greatest armies in history have fallen victim to. Instead, he chose a more subtle path. By striking hard, destroying key fortresses, and crippling Jin resources, he weakened the dynasty enough to ensure that they would never again pose a true threat to the steppe. But he left enough of their territory intact to avoid having to occupy and defend it continuously. In essence, he cut out the heart of their strength, then stepped back to allow them to wither on their own. This was a strategy of exhaustion, of breaking the enemy's will long before breaking their last defenses. The Jin, though still alive, were a shadow of their former selves. Their armies were disorganized, their leadership fractured, their economy drained, their people demoralized. They survived only because the Mongols permitted it, but the future was already written. The Jin dynasty would fall completely under the rule of Genghis Khan's successors. After withdrawing, the Mongol armies returned to the steppe, riding through fields of tall grass that rustled beneath their hooves. They carried stories of towering walls, bustling cities, and unfamiliar customs. But they also carried new knowledge of siege technologies, of foreign engineering, of the strengths and weaknesses of sedentary empires. This knowledge would soon be used to conquer lands far beyond China. Genghis Khan returned to his people not as a weary general, but as a visionary who had opened the door to the southern world. His achievements against the Jin cemented his reputation across the entire steppe. Tribes that once doubted him now followed him without hesitation. Foreign emissaries, hearing of the conquest of Zhongdu, approached with both fear and awe, and the Mongols themselves felt a new confidence radiating through their ranks. The victory was not simply a military triumph, it was a transformation. The Mongols, once seen as scattered clans of horsemen, had proven themselves capable of defeating one of the most established empires in Asia. They had learned to fight in forests, mountains, and cities' terrains completely foreign to the open steppe. They had learned to coordinate tens of thousands of warriors across vast distances, and they had learned that their destiny was far larger than herding animals or defending borders. The conquest of Zhongdu became a turning point in the story of the Mongol Empire. It demonstrated the power of adaptation, discipline, and unified purpose. It showed the world that the steppe had given birth not just to riders, but to conquerors. And in the quiet moments after the victory, as the wind carried the cool scent of spring across the plains, Genghis Khan looked toward the horizon and understood that his work was far from finished. Ahead lay new lands, new enemies, new empires. The Jin dynasty was only the beginning. The steppe had unleashed a force that no wall could contain, and so the Mongols gathered once more, preparing for journeys that would stretch across continents, reshape civilizations, and carve their legacy into the bones of the earth. But before they could reach the far corners of the world, they would first have to face another power, one that lay beyond deserts, mountains, and foreign kingdoms, a power that would test their endurance, their unity, and their ability to adapt even further. The Jin had fallen. China's gate had been breached. The winds of the world had begun to shift, and the Mongol Empire was only just beginning its rise. The wind that rolled across the vast desert carried with it the faint scent of distant markets, foreign spices, and stories whispered by travelers who had crossed half the world. To the Mongols, these whispers spoke of Khwarezm, a rich, sprawling empire lying far to the west, filled with bustling cities, towering minarets, and merchants who traded silks, gems, and knowledge across continents. It was a place of wealth and commerce, a land where ideas flowed as freely as goods, and where the rulers wielded power over millions of people. Genghis Khan, always curious, always striving to understand the world beyond the steppe, saw in Khwarezm an opportunity, not for conquest at first, but for trade. He believed that peaceful exchanges could enrich his people, strengthen diplomacy, and open the doors to mutual benefit. So he sent a caravan of merchants westward, loaded with furs, gold, and messages of goodwill. It was a gesture of trust, of respect, extended across thousands of miles, but that trust was shattered by a single, reckless decision. As the Mongol caravan entered the frontier city of Otrar, the governor Inalchuk, known as the Lion of Otrar, grew suspicious. He saw the wealth they carried, and imagined that these merchants were spies, sent to assess the defenses of the Khwarezm Empire. Greed, paranoia, and pride twisted his judgment. He ordered the entire caravan seized. The goods were confiscated. The merchants were executed. Their blood soaked the desert sands, turning a peaceful exchange into a terrible insult. When word of the slaughter reached the Mongol court, Genghis Khan did not respond with immediate rage. He believed that perhaps the Sultan of Khwarezm, Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, was ignorant of the governor's actions. So he sent 3 envoys to the Sultan, 1 Mongol, 2 Muslims, hoping to demonstrate respect for the Sultan's faith and culture. The message was simple: punish the governor of Otrar, and peace will be restored. But the Sultan was a proud man, easily swayed by flattery from his advisors. He believed the Mongols were nothing more than nomadic upstarts, strong on horseback, perhaps, but no match for a wealthy, ancient empire like Khwarezm. He refused to punish the governor. Worse still, he committed an act so offensive, so deeply dishonorable, that history still shudders at it. He killed one of the envoys, and humiliated the others by shaving their beards, one of the greatest insults imaginable. When the mutilated envoys returned to Genghis Khan, they fell to their knees and begged forgiveness for failing to secure peace. But they had done nothing wrong. It was the Sultan who had broken the sacred laws of diplomacy. It was the Sultan who had thrown aside the customs respected by all nations. And at that moment, something ancient and terrible stirred inside Genghis Khan. He rose to his feet, his voice steady as stone. He vowed vengeance to the ends of the earth. not out of blind fury, but out of a sense of cosmic justice. No ruler could spill Mongol blood without facing the storm that would follow. No empire could survive after committing such arrogance. The Mongols believed that the eternal blue sky had been insulted, and through them, justice would be delivered. What followed was not merely a war. It was a storm, a hurricane of precision, speed, and strategy that swallowed entire cities in days. A campaign so swift and devastating that historians still marvel at its execution. Genghis Khan gathered an army of around 120,000 elite riders, seasoned commanders, siege engineers, and scouts who could read the land like an open book. He divided them into multiple columns, each instructed to take different routes across deserts, mountains, and hostile terrain. This multi-pronged approach confused enemy forces and made the Mongol army seem far larger than it actually was. The march began. Across the steppe, across icy mountains where the air thinned and breath came in short, painful bursts. Across deserts where the heat shimmered like molten glass and sandstorms tore at their clothing. Yet the Mongols pressed forward, guided by discipline and an unwavering sense of purpose. To them, hardship was nothing new. To them, the world had always been a test of endurance. Now, they carried that endurance into the heart of a foreign empire. Otrar, the city where the merchants had been killed, was the first target. Its walls were tall, thick, and confident. The governor mocked the approaching Mongols, convinced that the city could withstand any assault. But the Mongols were no longer merely riders of the plains. They now commanded siege engines acquired from Chinese and Central Asian engineers, catapults, stone throwers, and devices that could tear down ancient walls. They launched rock after rock against the gates, causing the city to quake with each impact. They tunneled beneath the walls, collapsing towers and creating breaches. When the Mongols poured into the city, the defenders fought desperately. Streets filled with smoke, and the sharp cry of steel against steel. The governor was captured alive. Some chronicles say he was executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. Others say he was torn apart by the very people he once ruled. Either way, Otrar fell, and its fall was only the beginning. Meanwhile, other Mongol armies swept across the region with astonishing speed. They crossed frozen mountains, descended into green valleys, and advanced through deserts where lesser armies would have perished. The Khwarezm Empire was vast, but its size became a weakness. The Sultan had scattered his forces across too many fronts, leaving his cities vulnerable. He underestimated the Mongol ability to move fast and strike unexpectedly. Bukhara, one of the glittering jewels of the Muslim world, soon found itself surrounded by Mongol forces. The city shone with domed mosques, tall minarets, and bustling markets that had thrived for centuries. But no city, no matter how beautiful, could escape the storm. The Mongols took the outer defenses within days. When they entered the city, the citizens trembled in fear, certain that slaughter awaited them. Instead, Genghis Khan climbed the steps of the city's largest mosque. He surveyed the trembling crowd gathered below and declared that their leaders had betrayed them. He treated the ordinary citizens with relative mercy. Those who surrendered were spared. Those who resisted were judged harshly. The Mongols were not mindless destroyers. They were strategic, calculating, and deeply aware of the value of skilled individuals. As Bukhara fell, another Mongol force marched towards Samarkand, the shining capital of the Khwarezm Empire. Samarkand was a city of incredible beauty, a place where turquoise tiles glimmered like stars, where scholars gathered in libraries, and where poets wrote verses that floated through the markets. It was heavily fortified and guarded by thousands of soldiers. Yet the Mongols reached it in mere days. The defenders fought bravely, firing arrows from the walls and rallying behind their banners. But the Mongols attacked from multiple directions, using siege towers and catapults to break the defenses. Within less than a week, Samarkand fell. The speed of its defeat shocked the world. An empire that had boasted of its strength now watched its greatest cities collapse like sandcastles before a rising tide. Sultan Muhammad II, realizing the enormity of his mistake, fled rather than face the Mongol armies. He abandoned his cities, his soldiers, and even his family. He ran across deserts, over mountains, through small villages that barely recognized him. He disguised himself. He begged for shelter. He wandered in fear, hunted by the very storm he had unleashed. Genghis Khan sent a small force, led by the legendary General Jebe, to pursue the Sultan to the ends of the earth. This pursuit became one of the greatest military chases in history, spanning thousands of miles. Jebe's troops followed the Sultan across rivers, through inhospitable terrain, into territories where no Mongol had ever set foot. The Sultan, once ruler of a vast empire, became a fugitive with no allies and no hope. Eventually, he died on a lonely island in the Caspian Sea, ravaged by illness and terror. His death was quiet, unnoticed, and tragic, a stark contrast to the grandeur he once possessed. He died not in battle, but in isolation, haunted by the consequences of his own pride. With the Sultan gone, the Mongols turned their attention to the remaining strongholds of Khwarezm. Some cities surrendered immediately, hoping to avoid destruction. Others resisted, believing that honor required them to stand firm. But the Mongols adapted their treatment based on each city's behavior. Those who welcomed them, or at least offered no resistance, were often spared. Skilled artisans were protected and transported to Mongol lands to serve in crafting metalwork, architecture, and textiles. Scholars were preserved to contribute their knowledge. Merchants were allowed to continue their trade, strengthening the Mongol economy. But those who fought back, those who allowed pride to dictate their decisions, faced relentless consequences. Cities that resisted were burned. Leaders who defied the Mongols were executed. The Mongol approach was simple: reward loyalty, punish defiance, spare those who surrendered, crush those who fought without cause. It was a system that created order, established expectations, and instilled both fear and respect across the conquered lands. Through this method, the Mongols reshaped the region. They uprooted old systems of corruption. They destroyed networks of officials who exploited the weak. They established steady trade routes where goods could travel safely for the first time in years. They ensured the security of skilled workers, integrating them into the growing Mongol world. The destruction was immense, but so was the transformation. The Khwarezm campaign became legendary not only for its violence but for its strategic brilliance. It showed the world that the Mongols were not simply warriors of the plains. They were engineers of empire, architects of order, masters of logistics, mobility, and psychological warfare. By the end of the campaign, the Khwarezm Empire had collapsed entirely. Its cities lay in ashes or in Mongol hands. Its rulers were dead or fleeing. Its people were absorbed into the vast, expanding reach of the Mongol Empire. And across the steppe, across Asia, and across distant lands that had never heard of Genghis Khan before, one truth became clear: the Mongols were unstoppable. As the dust settled over the ruined cities and the screams faded into memory, the desert grew quiet again. Stars shimmered above the silent sands, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. The Mongol riders sat beside their campfires, staring into the flames, their armor gleaming softly under the night sky. They had crossed half the world, destroyed one of the mightiest empires in existence, and proven themselves masters of warfare. For Genghis Khan, the campaign was not merely a victory, it was justice. It was the fulfillment of a vow spoken when his envoys returned humiliated and wounded. He had promised to answer that insult to the ends of the earth, and he had done so. But this victory was also a lesson, a confirmation that the Mongol Empire was destined to reach far beyond the steppe. destined to reshape the world, destined to leave a mark as deep as the desert itself. And as the fires dimmed and the night wrapped itself around the encampment, Genghis Khan looked westward, beyond Persia, beyond distant mountains, beyond lands not yet known to him. The world was vast, and he intended to see all of it. The horizon stretched endlessly before the Mongol scouts, a vast ribbon of sky fading into distant mountains that shimmered with snow and secrets. Among the riders guiding this quiet advance was Subutai, the brilliant strategist whose mind moved with the precision of a drawn bow. He rode at the head of a small but formidable force, sent not to conquer, but to explore, to test the strength of distant lands, and to measure the pulse of nations lying far beyond the familiar steppes. The Caucasus Mountains rose before them like the spine of the world. These peaks were ancient, jagged, and silent, their slopes carved by centuries of ice and wind. The air grew thin as the Mongols climbed, and the cold wrapped around them like the breath of old spirits. Snow drifted quietly across narrow paths. Horses picked their steps carefully, hooves slipping on frozen stone. Subutai watched the terrain with calm, calculating eyes, noting every ridge, every valley, every detail that might one day hold strategic value. Crossing the Caucasus was not just a physical challenge, it was a passage between worlds. Behind them lay the open steppe they had always known. Ahead lay lands filled with forests, rivers, and kingdoms shaped by different histories, different gods, different fears. The Mongols moved silently, leaving only faint hoofprints that the winter wind soon erased. When they emerged from the mountains, the landscape changed dramatically. Great stretches of forest opened before them, broken by wide rivers that glittered like steel in the pale sunlight. Villages dotted the land, each with wooden houses, fields of wheat, and smoke curling gently from chimneys. To Subutai, it was both familiar and strange, a world of people who lived not as nomads, but rooted in soil that they tended year after year. Word of the Mongol arrival spread quickly. Messengers rode to nearby princes, warning them of the strange riders who moved like shadows and struck with thunderous speed. The Rus principalities, long divided by rivalry, now faced a threat none of them had expected. They formed an alliance with the Cumans, the steppe warriors who had once been Mongol targets themselves. Together, they gathered an army meant to crush Subutai's small force once and for all. But Subutai did not fear large armies. He studied them. He read them like the movement of wind across grass. Every step the allied forces took seemed to unfold exactly as he had predicted. The final confrontation came at the banks of the Kulka River. The water flowed steadily, quiet and cold, as birds circled overhead with slow, drifting motions. The allied Rus-Cuman forces waited with tens of thousands of soldiers, heavy cavalry, armored infantry, banners fluttering in the breeze. Their confidence filled the air like the steady beat of a drum. Subutai approached with calculated restraint. He let the enemy see him withdraw. He let them believe he was frightened, overwhelmed, ready to flee. But the Mongols were never running. They were leading, drawing the enemy deeper and deeper into a carefully laid trap. For 9 long days, the allied forces pursued the Mongols, pushing their soldiers beyond exhaustion. Armor grew heavy, horses stumbled, discipline wavered, but still they pushed forward, driven by pride and the illusion of victory. Then, at the moment Subutai had chosen, the Mongols turned. Their horses spun gracefully, their bows rose like the wings of hawks. Arrows darkened the sky in a silent, deadly cloud. The allied army, stretched thin and disorganized, collapsed almost instantly. The Cuman cavalry broke first. The Rus infantry was surrounded. Confusion rippled across their ranks like frost cracking across glass. The victory was absolute. The Mongols cut through the enemy like wind slicing through summer grass. Banners fell, commanders were captured, and the river carried away the echoes of battle, returning the land to its quiet rhythm. Yet Subutai did not claim territory. He did not raise a new banner or attempt to build a kingdom on foreign soil. He was not sent to conquer, he was sent to learn, to measure the strength of Europe, to test its borders, its armies, its leaders, to prepare the ground for a future his people had not yet imagined. After the victory, the Mongols did something that baffled all who later studied their campaign. They withdrew. They crossed back over the rivers, back over the plains, back through the passes of the Caucasus. Like mist fading with the morning sun, they slipped away, leaving behind only rumors, fear, and the memory of an army that seemed carved from smoke and thunder. Subutai returned to the east, his mind full of maps drawn only in memory. He carried reports of enemy strength, weaknesses, tactics, and politics. He carried the knowledge of terrain, rivers, weather, and the paths an invading army would one day take. He carried the certainty that Europe was vast, divided, and vulnerable. When he stood once more before Genghis Khan, he bowed his head and delivered every detail with the calm precision that defined him. He spoke of the mountain passes, of the forests that stretched like endless waves, of the rivers that curled through the land like silver serpents, of the princes who fought more against each other than against outside threats, of the armies that looked strong but fractured easily under pressure. Genghis Khan listened quietly. He understood that Subutai's reconnaissance was not just a report. It was a promise that someday, when the time was right, the Mongols would return. They would ride again across those same plains. They would follow the old tracks of this first expedition, and they would shake the foundations of Europe. But for now, the riders rested. The steppe welcomed them home with open grass and endless sky. The wind, gentle and familiar, nudged at their clothing as if acknowledging their journey. Subutai sat by a fire, staring into the glowing embers, his thoughts drifting not to the past but to the horizons yet to come. He had opened the path, he had traced the map, he had seen the world beyond the mountains. And in the quiet warmth of the flames, one truth became clear: this was only the beginning. The steppe had grown quiet in the later years of Genghis Khan's life, as if the earth itself paused to breathe between the great storms he had cast across continents. He was older now, though age rested lightly on him, like a thin frost on spring grass. His eyes still held the fierce clarity of a young warrior, yet they also carried the weight of a man who had shaped the world with his will. And even in these later years, he refused to let the edges of his empire remain unchallenged. Far to the southwest lay Shisha, the Tangut kingdom that had long existed as both ally and adversary to the Mongols. It was a land of desert fortresses, mountain passes, and cities built from sun-baked stone. The Tangut rulers had submitted to Mongol authority in earlier years, offering tribute to maintain peace. But in moments of Mongol distraction during wars with the Jin, or the vast campaign against Khwarezm, they dared to defy the Khan. Their refusal to send troops when called was an insult too deep to ignore. Genghis Khan, though weary from a lifetime of war, decided that Shisha would be his final campaign. He gathered his armies and rode toward the Tangut lands, crossing dunes that glowed gold beneath the desert sun. The air shimmered with heat by day and froze with sharp cold by night. Sandstorms battered the camps, swirling around them like whispered warnings. Yet the Mongols advanced, using the same precision and discipline that had carried them through decades of conquest. The Tangut people retreated into their fortified cities. They believed their walls, thick and ancient, could withstand anything. But the Mongols had learned too much, conquered too many fortresses, and mastered the art of siege. Walls no longer frightened them. They encircled the cities, starving them of supplies, cutting every path of escape. The drums of the Mongol army echoed through the valleys, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of fate drawing closer. As the siege tightened around the Tangut strongholds, something unexpected happened. Genghis Khan fell ill. Some accounts say he was injured after falling from his horse. Others speak of an arrow wound in earlier battles reopening. Still others whisper darker theories: poison, hidden assassins, or a slow sickness born from years of relentless campaigning. The true cause remains lost to time. Only one certainty remains: the great Khan's strength began to ebb. Yet even while fever clouded his vision, his will did not falter. He ordered the final destruction of Xia, ensuring that the Tangut kingdom would no longer defy Mongol power. His generals carried out his commands with unwavering loyalty, capturing the last Tangut cities and breaking their resistance completely. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The Khan's health worsened, his breath grew shallow, his voice weakened, and as the final embers of Xia faded into ash, Genghis Khan lay in his camp, his body failing, his spirit still blazing. The Mongol generals gathered around him, their faces carved with deep worry. He spoke to them softly, reminding them of the laws he had forged, the unity he had created, and the vision of an empire that must outlive him. He warned them against division. He urged them to stand together. And then, with a calm hand, he delivered the final decision of his life. He named Ogedai, his third son, as his successor. Not the eldest, not the strongest, but the one he believed possessed the steady judgment needed to guide the empire through its next chapter. He knew that the Mongol world would remain united only if a fair and balanced ruler sat on the throne. And Ogedai, with his patient temperament and dependable nature, was the one who could hold the tribes together. This choice revealed the Khan's wisdom even in his weakest hours. He did not choose based on favoritism or tradition. He chose based on the good of the empire. His generals accepted the decision with solemn loyalty, understanding that the stability of their world now depended on honoring his will. When the end finally came, it arrived quietly. There was no final roar, no declaration carved into the sky, only a slow exhale, a fading warmth, and the soft rustle of the tent walls as the desert wind brushed past. The man who had conquered half the known world slipped into silence. His death was concealed with absolute secrecy. The Mongols feared that news of his passing would embolden enemies. They wrapped his body in layers of white cloth, placed him in a coffin, and began the long journey back to Mongolia. The path home was guarded fiercely. No one outside the escort knew where the body traveled. No one dared approach. The forests parted before them. The rivers seemed to whisper. It is said that every witness to the funeral procession was killed to preserve the secrecy of his resting place. Legends say the coffin was buried somewhere in the sacred Burkhan Khaldun mountains. Others whisper that a great river was diverted to conceal his tomb. Some say no resting place was made at all, that his body was allowed to return to nature, consumed by the earth he had loved since boyhood. Wherever the truth lies, it remains hidden beneath centuries of grass, stone, and silence. The empire mourned in its own quiet way. Fires burned low in the camps. Warriors bowed their heads to the ground. Families whispered prayers to the eternal blue sky. And though grief weighed heavily upon them, one certainty remained. The world he built would not collapse. Ogedai would lead. The generals would honor the Yasa. The conquests would continue. Even in death, Genghis Khan shaped the future. His final campaign had ended. His breath had faded. But his legacy, vast as the horizon, enduring as the mountains, had only just begun. The steppe felt strangely still after the passing of Genghis Khan, as though the vast land itself paused to mourn the departure of a soul carved from wind, fire, and destiny. But kingdoms cannot rest for long. Empires cannot sleep. and the Mongol world, now stretching across half of Asia, needed a steady hand to guide it forward. Urgadai, third son of the great Khan, stood quietly at the center of the growing storm of responsibility. He was not the most fierce of the brothers, nor the most ambitious, nor the most cunning, but he possessed something far rarer: patience, fairness, and a deep understanding of the balance required to hold a colossal empire together. Genghis Khan had chosen him deliberately, knowing that the coming age would require not only warriors, but administrators, negotiators, and builders. When the Kurultai gathered to officially proclaim Urgadai as the new great Khan, the air was thick with ceremony. Warriors, nobles, generals, and elders assembled beneath the eternal blue sky, forming a ring of respect that stretched across the plains. The wind carried the scent of burned incense. The horses stood silent, as if sensing that this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. Urgadai accepted the title not with triumph, but with humility. He bowed to his father's memory and pledged to continue the legacy of unity, justice, and expansion. Once inaugurated, he turned his gaze not inward, but outward toward the unfinished dreams of the empire. To the south, the Jin dynasty still clung to fragments of power, weakened but not destroyed. To the west, the remnants of Khwarezm lay in disarray. To the north and east were lands untouched by Mongol hooves. And within the empire itself, newly conquered territories needed governance, stability, and vision. Urgadai's first great act was to complete his father's unfinished war against the Jin. He assembled a vast army of seasoned commanders and young warriors eager to prove themselves. The campaign moved swiftly across northern China, sweeping aside scattered resistance with practiced precision. The Jin capital, nestled between mountains and rivers, stood as their last refuge. It was a city of stone, ancient and proud. But even the strongest walls could not withstand the relentless Mongol approach. Siege engines battered the gates, fire rained down upon rooftops. And at last, the city fell, its defenses crumbling like dry clay beneath a hammer. With the destruction of the Jin, northern China came fully under Mongol authority. Urgadai celebrated the victory not with extravagant feasts, but with the calm assurance of a man fulfilling destiny. He established systems to manage the vast new territories, appointing administrators, setting tax structures, and ensuring that both Mongols and Chinese populations were governed fairly. He understood that conquest was only the first step. Stability was the true foundation of empire. Urgadai also recognized the importance of a capital worthy of their expanding world. So he ordered the construction of Karakoram, a city on the Orkhon River where nomadic tradition met administrative ambition. It rose slowly from the earth, tent by tent, beam by beam, until it became a lively mosaic of cultures. Artisans from across the empire gathered there: Chinese craftsmen, Persian metalworkers, Uyghur scribes, Khitan carpenters. Markets filled with silk, spices, gold, and carved jade. Temples of different religions stood near one another, symbols of the empire's unusual acceptance and diversity. Karakoram became not just a capital, but a crossroads of civilization. In this thriving center, Urgadai created a series of innovative policies. He improved the Yam system, a vast network of messenger stations that stretched across the empire like arteries carrying the lifeblood of communication. Horses were kept ready at every stop. Supplies were maintained in abundance. Messengers could travel thousands of miles in mere days, delivering orders, intelligence, and diplomatic messages with breathtaking speed. It was one of the greatest logistical achievements of the medieval world. Urgadai also issued coins, standardized weights and measures, and established clear tax laws that balanced the needs of nomads and sedentary populations. He encouraged trade along the Silk Road, offering protection to caravans and reducing barriers that once hindered merchants. Under his rule, Goods flowed across continents with a freedom rarely seen before. The Mongol Empire became not only a military machine, but an economic bridge linking east and west. Yet Ögedei never forgot the traditions of the steppe. He continued to support large gatherings for feasting, archery competitions, and horse racing. He valued the counsel of old warriors and respected the customs that had shaped his father's lifetime. This balance between innovation and tradition made his rule both stable and beloved. But even as he built cities, strengthened trade, and organized his empire, Ögedei was still a son of Genghis Khan. Expansion was in his blood, and beyond the western horizon lay lands ripe for conquest. He called upon Subutai, now a legendary commander whose name inspired awe across Asia. Subutai proposed an ambitious plan, a massive western campaign that would strike deep into Europe. Ögedei approved, understanding that such a campaign would not only expand the empire but also test the strength of the world beyond the steppes. The western expeditions swept through the Caucasus, the Russian principalities, and into the plains of Hungary and Poland. Cities fell, armies broke. The Mongols seemed unstoppable. Their movements flowed like water, fluid and devastating, guided by Subutai's unmatched understanding of terrain and human psychology. Yet even as the Mongol banners reached the gates of Europe, an urgent summons called the generals back east. Ögedei had fallen ill. The empire could not choose a new ruler without the presence of its highest commanders, so the armies withdrew, leaving behind a Europe stunned by the sheer scale and precision of the Mongol advance. Back in Mongolia, Ögedei's health deteriorated quickly. He had always been known for his hospitality, his fondness for celebration, and his warm nature. Some say the heavy drinking that accompanied his feasts weakened his body. Others believe age simply caught up with him. But the truth, like many stories of the steppe, lies somewhere in the quiet space between legend and reality. When Ögedei died, the Mongol world felt a tremor of uncertainty. He had been the stabilizing force after his father's death. He had carried the torch with dignity, wisdom, and strength. His rule had transformed the empire from a vast conquest machine into a functioning, interconnected civilization. The mourning ceremonies lasted for weeks. Warriors, nobles, and envoys from distant lands all came to pay respects. The eternal blue sky seemed to dim with sorrow. Horses neighed with unusual restlessness. The steppe, which had carried the echoes of countless victories, now held the soft silence of grief. But even in mourning, the empire endured. Its systems, stronger than ever, continued to function. Its territories remained stable. Its armies waited for new orders. Ögedei's policies had proven their value. They were the foundation of a structure that could survive the passing of its architect. The empire he left behind stretched across deserts, plains, mountains, and rivers. It spanned from the Pacific to the edges of Europe. It included countless cultures, languages, and beliefs, all held loosely yet firmly within a vast imperial embrace. This was the golden age of the Mongol Empire, and Ögedei had guided it with a steady hand. His legacy rested not only in the lands he conquered, but in the roads he built, the laws he refined, and the peace he nurtured. Under his rule, the Mongols became more than conquerors. They became administrators, patrons of trade, and guardians of a world connected by movement and exchange. The effects of his leadership would echo long after his death, shaping the world for generations. And as the steppe wind drifted over Karakorum, brushing gently against the walls of the city he built, it carried a whisper of gratitude. For Ögedei had proven that even in an empire born from war, peace, structure, and wisdom could flourish. His era had been one of bridging worlds, guiding people, and strengthening foundations. And though his reins slipped from his hands when his final breath faded, the path he carved stretched far beyond the horizon. a path his descendants would follow, sometimes wisely, sometimes recklessly, but always beneath the same endless sky that had watched over him. The Mongol Empire, vast as a drifting continent, entered another era of transformation under the rule of Mongol Khan, grandson of the great Genghis. Where Ögedei had built the infrastructure of empire, Mongol sought to strengthen its foundation and expand its reach even further, bringing order to distant territories and restoring discipline to a world that was growing too large to manage loosely. He was calm, calculating, and determined, qualities that resonated deeply with the ambitions of the empire. One of Mongol's most decisive acts as Great Khan was commissioning his brother Hulagu to lead a monumental campaign toward the heart of the Islamic world. This was no ordinary mission. It was a sweeping plan to secure the southwestern frontiers, crush rebellious forces, and dismantle powers that had long defied or threatened Mongol authority. And at the center of this grand design stood a single glittering target: Baghdad. Baghdad, the jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate, was a city of scholars, artists, and philosophers. Its libraries held ancient knowledge. Its markets overflowed with silk, perfumes, and rare manuscripts. Its scholars debated astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and theology beneath the glow of oil lamps. For centuries, it had been a beacon of culture and learning, a place where the world gathered to exchange ideas. But by the mid-13th century, the once great caliphate had grown fractured and uncertain. Its political strength had faded. Its borders were vulnerable. Its leadership, though wrapped in ceremonial grandeur, no longer commanded the loyalty it once had. This made Baghdad a tempting and necessary target for the Mongols. Hulagu set out with one of the largest Mongol armies ever assembled. Tens of thousands of riders formed the core. Engineers from China and Persia traveled with them, bringing siege knowledge and constructing machines capable of tearing through ancient walls. Artisans, translators, scouts, and supply officers marched alongside, creating a moving city of power and purpose. As they advanced westward, cities bowed before them, understanding the futility of resistance. The Mongol army crossed mountains, deserts, and rivers with the same steady rhythm that had carried the empire across Asia. Fortresses fell like dry leaves beneath winter wind. Rulers who resisted were punished swiftly. Those who surrendered were spared and incorporated into the growing force. Hulagu was not cruel for cruelty's sake. He simply followed the Mongol principle that defiance must be crushed, but loyalty rewarded. As Baghdad came into view, the inhabitants felt a chill sweep through their once thriving city. The Caliph, al-Mustasim, did not fully comprehend the danger. He believed that Baghdad's reputation, beauty, and spiritual significance would protect it from harm. He believed allies would come. He believed the Mongols would hesitate. He was wrong. The Mongols encircled Baghdad in a vast crescent of precision and discipline. Siege towers rose against the sky. Catapults were assembled. Trenches were dug. The Tigris River glimmered nearby, its calm waters unaware of the devastation soon to unfold. From the walls of the city, terrified citizens watched an army unlike any they had ever seen, an army that moved like a single living organism. The siege began with a thunderous roar. Stones launched from Mongol catapults crashed into the ancient walls with the deep, echoing sound of mountains breaking. Flaming projectiles arced across the sky, landing with bursts of fire that illuminated the night like tiny suns. Engineers drilled, hammered, and coordinated strikes that weakened the city's defenses day by day. Inside Baghdad, panic spread. The people begged their leaders to negotiate, but the caliph hesitated, trapped between pride and fear. Food supplies dwindled, wells ran dry. Smoke rose from districts struck by Mongol fire. The once great city trembled as though shaken by the weight of fate itself. After weeks of unrelenting assault, the walls of Baghdad finally gave way. The Mongols surged into the city, moving through its winding streets with precision. The defenders, exhausted and broken, could not hold their ground. The caliph was captured, and the gates of Baghdad opened to a tide of Mongol soldiers unlike anything the Islamic world had ever witnessed. What followed became one of history's most devastating moments, an event that reshaped the cultural and political landscape of the Middle East. Libraries that had preserved centuries of knowledge were destroyed or abandoned. Canals and gardens that once symbolized the city's brilliance were left in ruin. The House of Wisdom, one of the greatest centers of learning the world had ever known, stood silent as the Mongol tide swept through. The caliph's fate remains a solemn tale. Some chronicles say he was executed by being rolled in a carpet and trampled, ensuring no royal blood touched the earth. Others describe slower, more symbolic deaths. Regardless of the method, the message was clear. The Abbasid Caliphate had come to an end. Across the Islamic world, shock waves spread. Cities whispered in fear. Scholars mourned the loss of knowledge. Rulers trembled at the thought of facing Hulagu's advancing armies. For the first time in centuries, Baghdad, the beating heart of Islamic culture, had fallen. Yet even in the destruction, the Mongol approach remained consistent. Artisans were spared, engineers were protected, scholars with valuable knowledge were preserved. Those who submitted found places within the new order. Those who resisted met the force of Mongol justice. Hulagu established the Ilkhanate in Persia, creating a new branch of the Mongol Empire that blended Mongol rule with the long-standing traditions of the region. Cities rebuilt themselves, trade routes reopened, innovation returned, albeit slowly, in the shadow of what had been lost. Mungke, watching from the Mongolian heartland, saw the success of his brother's campaign and the expansion of Mongol influence across the Middle East. But the fall of Baghdad remained the most unforgettable symbol of this era, a turning point that revealed both the incredible might of the Mongols and the fragility of even the greatest civilizations. When news of the conquest reached distant lands, scholars, monarchs, and merchants alike felt a ripple of disbelief. Baghdad, the city that had stood for centuries as a pillar of learning and empire, had fallen in mere weeks. This single event reshaped global power, sending echoes across continents. And in the quiet that followed the storm, as the smoke faded and the Tigris returned to its gentle flow, the Mongol banners fluttered above the ruined walls, signaling the dawn of a new age. An age carved by the will of Mungke, the vision of Hulagu, and the unstoppable momentum of an empire that seemed to stretch endlessly toward every horizon. The Mongol Empire, once united beneath a single banner that rippled like a silver wave across continents, entered a new and complicated era as the next generation rose to power. Among the many grandsons of Genghis Khan, one figure stood out from the rest: Kublai, a man shaped not only by steppe traditions but also by the culture, philosophy, and vastness of China. He was curious, intelligent, and contemplative, with a mind that sought knowledge as eagerly as it sought power. Yet before he could ascend to greatness, he had to face a crisis that threatened to fracture the empire from within. The death of Mongol Khan in 1259 left a vacuum that quickly spiraled into conflict. Brothers, cousins, and rival claimants prepared their banners, sharpened their blades, and gathered supporters, each believing they were destined to inherit the mantle of supreme authority. At the center of this storm stood two brothers, Kublai and Arik Bok. Arik Bok, the youngest, embodied the traditional heart of the steppe. He was supported by many of the old guard, conservative nobles, respected generals, and leaders who wished to preserve the pure nomadic identity of the empire. Kublai, meanwhile, had spent years in northern China. He had studied Confucian texts, conversed with scholars, and learned the intricacies of governing sedentary populations. To many Mongols, He seemed too deeply influenced by foreign ways, but to those who lived in China's vast territories, he represented stability, diplomacy, and a bridge between cultures. The stage was set for a civil war that would shake the empire's foundations. The brothers' rivalry, though bound by blood, grew harder with each passing season. Alliances hardened, armies assembled, and soon, the once united Mongol world found itself divided into two camps, staring across the plains like reflections in a broken mirror. Kublai moved quickly, gathering support from Chinese administrators, Mongol nobles loyal to his vision, and regional leaders who feared Arik-Bok's traditionalist policies. He established his base in the rich lands of the north, drawing strength from abundant resources and dense populations. Arik-Bok, meanwhile, held firm control over Mongolia, the empire's spiritual heart, supported by warriors who believed that the great Khan should remain tied to the old ways. The conflict unfolded in a series of battles marked by strategy, endurance, and the shifting fortune of war. Kublai's armies, bolstered by the logistical advantages of China, gradually gained the upper hand. His command was steady, his generals experienced, and his supply lines vast. Arik-Bok fought with courage and conviction, but the harsh realities of geography and resources slowly eroded his strength. After 4 long years, Arik-Bok surrendered. He stood before his brother tired, proud, unbroken, and accepted defeat with dignity. Kublai did not respond with cruelty. He honored the bond of brotherhood, though Arik-Bok would remain under guarded supervision for the rest of his life. The civil war had ended, but its consequences lingered like cracks spreading beneath the surface of frozen river ice. Kublai, now undisputed Great Khan, turned his attention to a grand vision, the complete incorporation of China into the Mongol world. He understood its importance, its wealth, its infrastructure, its dense population, and its ancient culture. He believed that ruling China fully would secure the Mongol Empire's long-term stability, and so, in 1271, he founded the Yuan dynasty, claiming the mandate of heaven as his own. For the first time in history, a steppe-born ruler donned the robes of a Chinese emperor. He built a capital at Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing, a city that blended Mongol ambition with Chinese architecture and philosophy. Its grand avenues, palaces, and gardens showcased the meeting of two civilizations. Foreign travelers, including the Venetian Marco Polo, later described the city with awe, painting a portrait of dazzling wealth, diversity, and innovation. Under Yuan rule, Kublai presided over a vast, multicultural empire. He encouraged trade, supported arts and sciences, and welcomed scholars from across Asia and Europe. Religious tolerance flourished. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and others all found places in his court. He established a postal system even more advanced than his predecessors, linking the world through lines of communication that stretched like threads across continents. But even as Kublai strengthened the Chinese half of his empire, the vast Mongol world began to strain under its own weight. Distance, cultural differences, and competing dynastic ambitions created fractures that no ruler, no matter how gifted, could fully mend. The first to drift away was the Golden Horde in the western steppes of Russia. Though they still respected the family lineage, they increasingly followed their own political needs, ruling their territories independently and forging alliances separate from the Great Khan. Their Khans paid lip service to Kublai, but they no longer sought guidance from the distant capital of Khanbalik. Next came the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, whose rulers resented Kublai's embrace of Chinese customs. To them, the heart of the empire had always been the steppe, not the palaces of the south. Tensions grew, and loyalties thinned, until the Chagatai domains stood effectively apart from Kublai authority. Finally, the Ilkhanate in Persia, founded by Hulagu, followed its own path as well. It maintained cultural and commercial ties with the broader Mongol world, but answered primarily to its local needs. Persian culture, Islam, and regional politics shaped its direction, drifting steadily from the orbit of the Great Khan in China. Though not yet fully severed, these khanates functioned more like siblings living in separate homes rather than children under one father's roof. The unity that Genghis Khan had forged through fire and will was dissolving into 4 distinct realms, each proud, each ambitious, each guided by its own destiny. Kublai felt the weight of this fracturing deeply. He worked tirelessly to maintain alliances, send emissaries, and preserve the vision of a universal empire. But he also understood a painful truth. The Mongol Empire, which had stretched across continents like a single breath of wind, was too vast, too varied, and too full of differing ambitions to remain united forever. As Kublai aged, his once vigorous spirit softened under the burdens of leadership and loss. The death of his beloved wife Chabi struck him hard. The deaths of his sons weighed on him like storms pressing against the horizon. His health faltered, his court grew more complex, filled with intrigues that tested his patience. And gradually, the glow of the empire's golden unity faded into a gentler, dimmer light. Yet even in decline, Kublai remained a figure of immense presence. He sat upon his throne in Khanbalik, surrounded by courtiers, foreign ambassadors, poets, and scholars. His voice steady and commanding, he oversaw reforms, cared for the people, and continued to nurture the cultural blending that defined his rule. For all its challenges, the Yuan dynasty became a symbol of an empire that embraced diversity and knowledge, a place where the world met and exchanged ideas. When Kublai Khan finally passed away in 1294, the empire mourned not only a ruler, but an era of vast horizons, an era of bridges built between nations, an era of dreams woven from both steppe winds and Chinese wisdom. The Mongol Empire, once united from the Danube to the Pacific, would never again be whole. It had become 4 great khanates, drifting apart like pieces of a shattered star. Yet each piece still carried the light of the original flame. And in the quiet years that followed, as the borders shifted and new powers rose, stories of Kublai's reign lived on soft as the wind, deep as history, echoing across mountains and deserts and the ancient halls of memory. The vast Mongol Empire, once stretching across continents with the force of a great wind, entered an age where its once unbreakable unity slowly dissolved like mist drifting from a morning river. Its 4 great khanates, born from the legacy of Genghis Khan, each carried echoes of the old strength, but none possessed the power to keep the world bound beneath one banner forever. The age of conquering storms had passed. Ahead lay the quieter age of fragmentation, change, and the rise of new powers from the ashes of the old. In the west, the Golden Horde, once a mighty force dominating the steppes of Russia, began to weaken under the weight of its own divisions. For decades, it had ruled over cities along the Volga, collected tribute from Russian princes, and patrolled the plains with the authority of a nation carved from horse and bow. But internal rivalries soon grew sharper than any Mongol blade. Different branches of the royal family fought for power. Khans rose and fell with dizzying speed. And beneath these conflicts, a new force stirred quietly among the forests and riverlands of the north. The Principality of Moscow, once small and unremarkable, began gathering strength. Its princes learned the politics of patience, paying tribute when necessary, waiting, watching, and slowly building alliances. When the Golden Horde fractured into competing groups, Kazan, Astrakhan, the Crimean Khanate, its grip over the Rus weakened. Moscow seized the opportunity. Battle by battle, treaty by treaty, it asserted independence. The moment of final rupture came with the famous stand on the Ugra River, where the Mongol armies withdrew without a fight. The long era of Mongol dominance in Russia had ended quietly. not with the roar of war drums, but with the soft retreat of an army that no longer possessed the strength to enforce its will. Far to the south, the Ilkhanate struggled with its own storms. Founded by Hulagu after the fall of Baghdad, it had once been a powerful state stretching across Persia and Mesopotamia. Its courts glittered with scholars, astronomers, architects, and poets. Trade flourished along the Silk Road, but like all great things built too quickly, it carried seeds of instability within it. When the last strong Ilkhan died without a clear heir, chaos unfolded. Princes and generals battled for supremacy, forming short-lived dynasties that rose and fell like waves. The land fractured into competing territories, and from this turmoil emerged a man whose name would soon cast a long shadow over Central Asia: Timur. Known in the West as Tamerlane, Timur was not descended from Genghis Khan, yet he claimed his legacy with fierce conviction. He united warring factions through force, ambition, and brilliant military talent. Under his rule, the Timurid Empire rose from the ruins of the Ilkhanate, becoming a new center of culture, learning, and conquest. Timur's armies marched across Persia, India, and the Middle East, leaving behind cities of breathtaking beauty and cities scarred by his wrath. The Ilkhanate had died, but from its ashes, a new empire had taken shape, one that carried the spirit of the steppes into a new age. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate faced a slower, quieter decline. It had always been a place where steppe traditions and settled cultures met, mixing languages, beliefs, and ways of life. But this diversity, once a strength, became a source of constant tension. Different tribes, cities, and religious groups vied for influence. Local rulers gained power while central authority faded. Generals became warlords, oases became miniature kingdoms, and little by little, the Chagatai realm shattered into fragments that no Khan could gather back together. Some regions embraced Islam, others clung to the shamanic traditions of the steppe. Still others blended both, creating rich, complex identities that history would later absorb into new nations. By the time Timur rose to power, much of the Chagatai region had already fallen into his orbit. The old Khanate continued in name, but its unity was only a memory carried by wandering poets and aging warriors. Meanwhile, in the east, the Yuan dynasty founded by Kublai Khan faced its own unraveling. Kublai had ruled China with grace and ambition, blending Mongol might with Chinese governance. But after his death, the dynasty struggled. Corruption spread through the government. Costs of war and palace construction drained the treasury. Natural disasters struck: floods, famines, and plagues that burdened the people. And beneath all these hardships, tension grew between Mongol rulers and the Chinese majority they governed. Rebellions began to simmer, like water heating slowly over a fire. Local leaders rallied peasants. Secret societies whispered in the shadows. Patriotic poets wrote verses mourning the fall of old dynasties. The discontent rose year by year, until it could no longer be contained. Then came Zhu Yuanzhang, a former monk turned rebel leader whose charisma and discipline united the fractured resistance. His armies swept across China, city by city, defeating Mongol garrisons weakened by years of internal decay. In 1368, they marched into Dadu Kublai Khan's magnificent capital. The Yuan dynasty fell, the Mongols retreated north to the steppe, and the Ming dynasty rose, marking the rebirth of Chinese rule. The loss of China was more than a political defeat. It symbolized the fading of the old world Genghis Khan had built. Where once the Mongols ruled from Korea to Hungary, now their power was confined to smaller, scattered realms. The dream of universal empire had unraveled like threads of silk blown apart by the wind. Yet the Mongol legacy did not vanish. It flowed quietly through the veins of the civilizations that replaced them. In Russia, Moscow's rise carried echoes of the administrative reforms first imposed by the Horde. In Persia, Timurid art and architecture flourished on foundations laid by the Ilkhanate. In Central Asia, languages and cultures mixed in ways shaped by centuries of Mongol presence, and in China, the Yuan dynasty's innovations lived on beneath the surface of Ming administration. Empires rise like flames, empires fall like embers, but their warmth lingers, their light influences everything touched by their glow. The Mongol Khanates did not fade in a single moment. They dissolved slowly, gently, like snow melting under spring sun. Each left behind stories, art, leaders, and legacies. Each shaped the world in ways both subtle and profound. And even as their banners fell, the memory of the great empire of its riders, its laws, its vast horizons remained woven into the tapestry of history, soft as a whisper carried across endless grasslands beneath the eternal blue sky. Long after the hooves of Mongol horses faded from the roads of the world, their influence continued to drift through history like dust carried gently by the wind. Empires may fall, banners may crumble, and great khans may slip into silence, but the echoes of their achievements linger in ways that shape generations who never saw the rise or the fall. The Mongol Empire, though fractured, left behind a legacy vast, intricate, and impossible to ignore. One of its most enduring gifts was the unification of the Silk Road, the ancient artery that linked east and west. Before the Mongols, merchants journeyed through mountains and deserts with trembling hearts, worried not only about storms but about bandits, feuding kingdoms, and unpredictable tolls. But under Mongol rule, the Silk Road transformed into a protected passageway. Guarded by an empire that spanned continents, caravans traveled from China to Persia, from India to Anatolia, under the shelter of a system that valued trade as a lifeline of civilization. Merchants carried porcelain, jade, silver, spices, and fabrics dyed with colors unknown to other lands. Along with goods came ideas, mathematical theories, healing practices, astronomical knowledge, and stories that bridged worlds. For the first time in centuries, the Silk Road breathed freely, becoming a vibrant, beating network of exchange. This period of stability allowed a profound cultural spread unlike any before it. Artisans traveled across borders to teach and learn. Musicians brought new instruments from one end of the empire to the other. Architects blended Persian domes with Chinese courtyards and steppe motifs. Technologies traveled with equal ease. Papermaking crossed into the Middle East. Gunpowder secrets reached Europe. Agricultural techniques moved between continents, changing diets and farming forever. Religion flowed along these same roads, carried by monks, traders, and scholars who found safety under the Mongol banner. Buddhists from Tibet debated philosophical ideas with Taoists in China. Muslim astronomers shared their star charts with Christians and Jews in Persia. Nestorian Christians traveled farther east than they had ever gone before, building small communities near Mongol administrative centers. The empire did not impose a single belief system. Instead, it became a crossroads where faiths lived side by side beneath the watching sky. This unusual tolerance, rare in medieval history, allowed intellectual and spiritual exchange to flourish. Another significant legacy of the Mongols lay in the Yasa, the legal code established by Genghis Khan. Though not preserved in written form, its principles lingered in memory and practice. It emphasized loyalty, discipline, justice, and responsibility. Stealing was punished harshly, for property defined survival on the steppe. Lies, treachery, and betrayal were crimes against the social fabric. But the Yasa also protected the vulnerable women, messengers, and those who surrendered peacefully. It provided guidelines that any warrior, no matter his origin, could follow. In many ways, it served as one of the earliest forms of structured law across multiple nations, a medieval version of equitable governance. Even as parts of the empire collapsed, The spirit of Yasa lived on, informing leadership, shaping expectations, and influencing how rulers approached justice and administration. Its core idea was simple yet transformative. Stability arises not from fear alone but from fairness. But perhaps the most heartfelt legacy rests not in trade routes, technologies, or legal codes, but in the memory of Genghis Khan himself, a figure both feared and revered, a man whose life became legend. In modern Mongolia, his name is spoken with a deep reverence that blends history, culture, and national pride. He is not merely a conqueror, he is the father of a people, the unifier of tribes, the symbol of resilience in harsh landscapes where survival has always demanded courage. His image appears in songs, poems, and festivals. Children learn his stories from an early age. The tallest statues in the country honor his silhouette against the horizon. His legacy is felt in the wind that sweeps across the grasslands, in the quiet dignity of herders who still live as their ancestors did, and in the sense of identity that binds the Mongol nation. To Mongolians, Genghis Khan represents not destruction but unity, not cruelty but leadership, not conquest but the belief that a scattered people could become strong together. And beyond Mongolia, his legacy lives on in the world he reshaped. Global trade networks expanded because of the Mongols. Cultures understood one another because of the Mongols. Knowledge traveled, blossomed, and evolved through the paths the Mongols opened. The world became larger and yet more connected, a paradox only possible because an empire once stretched across the earth like a vast, unbroken thread. The Mongol Empire that Genghis Khan forged has long vanished. Its cities have turned to dust. Its borders have faded into the shifting lines of history. But its influence endures in maps, in languages, in economies, in the movement of ideas, and in the quiet stories told across the steppe. And as the sun sets over rolling grasslands, and herders call their animals home beneath a sky unchanged by centuries, the legacy of the Mongols drifts softly through the air. A legacy carried by wind, a legacy born of unity, a legacy embedded in the world's memory, gentle and eternal, like the whisper of hooves across an endless plain. The long journey through the rise and fall of the Mongol Empire now drifts toward its gentle conclusion, like the final ember of a fire glowing softly in the cool night air. The stories of warriors, cities, battles, and horizons that stretched farther than imagination have carried us across centuries, and now they settle quietly in the stillness of memory. History itself seems to exhale, allowing the dust of 1,000 hoofprints to settle back into the comforting embrace of the earth. Far across the steppe, as the sun dips low and paints the grasslands gold, the world grows peaceful. Horses graze in slow circles, a distant river murmurs quietly, and above everything, the eternal blue sky spreads wide and calm, unchanged by the passing of empires. It is beneath this sky that the Mongol story began, and beneath this same sky that it softly ends for tonight. Imagine the wind gliding over the wide plains, gentle and cool, carrying faint echoes of the lives we have followed. The laughter of children racing horses across open fields, the steady breath of warriors preparing for long campaigns, the chanting of shamans at dawn, the crackle of fires in nomad camps. Each sound floats across the distance like a memory suspended in the air. The great Khans Genghis, Urgadai, Munka, Kublai now feel like shadows stretching across time, their presence softened by the distance of centuries. They were men of flesh and ambition, yet their deeds became threads woven into the vast tapestry of the world. They built, they conquered, they governed, and they dreamed. And now, their stories drift like gentle clouds, lingering but no longer heavy with urgency. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the rhythmic beat of hooves riding across the plains, not in war, but in peaceful travel, not in conquest, But in return, the riders move slowly now, with no more battles to fight and no more cities to besiege. Only the open land remains constant, wide, and endlessly welcoming. Night begins to fall softly over the steppe. The sky turns deep blue, then violet, then a velvet black sprinkled with countless stars. These are the same stars the Mongol warriors once used to guide their journeys. The same stars that watched Temujin grow from an abandoned boy into the unifier of tribes. The same stars that reflected in the rivers of China, Persia, and the distant edges of Europe as the empire expanded. They remain unchanged and eternal, gentle witnesses to everything that has passed. In the calm darkness, a campfire glows. Its light flickers against the felt walls of a jur, warm and steady. Inside, a mother tells her child the old stories of the Khans who shaped their people, of the mountains blessed by spirits, of the wind that remembers everything. Her voice is soft, rhythmic, comforting. The child's eyes grow heavy, lulled by the cadence of tales passed down for generations. Outside, the grass sways in slow, sleepy waves beneath the night breeze. The sound is quiet, like the whisper of history itself easing into rest. This land remembers glories and tragedies alike, but it holds them gently, without judgment. For the steppe has seen empires rise and fall for thousands of years. It knows that all things great or small eventually return to silence. As the fire dims, the world outside settles deeper into stillness. The horses shift softly in their sleep. The moon climbs slowly over the horizon, casting a pale silver glow over the landscape. It feels as though the entire steppe is breathing in calm, steady rhythm, exhaling the last traces of the Mongol Empire's long and turbulent journey. And now, as this chapter draws to its peaceful close, the vast empire that once stretched like an ocean of power across continents becomes a gentle ripple in the sea of time. Its conquests are now memories, its rulers are now legends, its people are now ancestors who whisper through the winds. What remains is the legacy carried quietly by the world and the soft imprint of their stories in our hearts. Let your thoughts drift like the Mongol riders fading into the twilight distance. Let the weight of the journey fall away. Let the calm of the open steppe settle around you like a warm blanket. There is no need to remember every battle or every name. Only the feeling of the wide horizon remains, the sense of standing beneath a sky so vast that all worries become small. This is where we leave the empire, not in war, but in peace. Not in the roar of armies, but in the hush of night. Not in the rise of ambition, but in the settling of dust across quiet plains. The story rests now. The earth is calm. The sky is endless. And you too may rest, cradled by the same gentle quiet that holds the memory of the Mongols and the long passage of time.